Yes, it is afternoon. The days get long. Good afternoon to everybody. Today, thank you very much for coming. There's quite a good number of people. I think we're going to have a very interesting hearing today. We're talking about online platforms in the digital world. Without further ado, I will turn over the floor to Commissioner and Vice President of the Commission, Jyrki Katainen. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Christianis and Henna for organizing, and Monsieur Souvin for organizing this event. We are talking about very topical issue because lots of things are happening around the digital single market, and platform economy is a significant part of it. We have both opportunities and challenges around in this issue, and we as a regulator must be very careful when deciding what to do in order to encourage operators to create new opportunities for innovations and job creation. Worldwide, more than 2 billion people are using social networks. In Europe, almost half of the population uses online platforms. So we are talking about not a minor phenomenon, but a major issue which can reshape our economy. Online platforms have transformed how we work, how we live, communicate, shop and receive and share information. They have a major impact on the current and future digital economy. Platform economy has brought many important benefits to the digital economy and society. Online platforms have the ability to create new markets and create jobs, contribute to growth, increase consumer choice and organize new forms of participation, thereby increasing citizens' participation. Platform economy is still a rather recent phenomenon. Online platforms are also continue to evolve at the speed previously not seen in any other sector of the economy. As part of the digital single market strategy and digital single market single market strategy, the Commission undertook to carry out an in-depth assessment of the role of online platforms and also examine the developments around the collaborative economy. In spring 2016, a comprehensive analysis for both online platforms and the collaborative economy were presented. The key challenge was to find the right regulatory approach which would stimulate innovation without over-regulating this emerging domain or under-regulating well-defined problems. A classical story about the European regulator or decision maker is that once we find a new emerging business, we start thinking, okay, I have to regulate it. If the business is still growing, we think that, okay, we have to tax it. And once it's dead, we think we have to subsidize it. So in order to avoid this typical story to happen again, we must be very careful what to do, what to regulate, what not to regulate in order to create Europe as a continent where new business models can rise and develop. The important contribution of platforms to jobs growth and innovation needs to be encouraged, and platform economy needs to develop in a reasonable manner. If the EU wants to be a leader in platform economy, we need to create a right environment for platforms to grow and prosper in Europe. Europe should embrace the innovations and opportunities that these platforms offer, both for businesses and citizens. The platform economy gives major innovation opportunities and incentives to innovate for different actors, from startups to established market operators who are developing new business models, products and services. There are many successful European startups. In fact, there is no major difference between the United States and EU when it comes to creation of new firms. Most of them rely heavily on digital environment. Many of them are or use platforms. Still, in comparison too many EU businesses remain small, fail after a few years, or decide to move to the third countries. We have asked them what they need to thrive. They say the internet crosses borders, and we also need to grow across borders. Clearly, the growing importance of platforms raises not only opportunities but also new policy and regulatory challenges. A significant set of rules already exist, and those rules apply to platforms as well as to all economic operators. Consumer law, competition law, labor law are there to be respected. The digital single market and platform economy cannot succeed without the trust of our citizens in online platforms and without online platforms respecting all applicable legislation. Where specific problems arise, we will look into the situation and we may decide to intervene. We follow a problem-based approach. This is very important, not to create overall new set of regulation, but to adopt merely a problem-based approach. First, we have identified, for example, areas of intervention in the copyright field, and we proposed specific rules in the recently presented copyright proposal. Second, hate speech and better protection of minors also form a cornerstone, especially when it comes to videos. Online video sharing proposal will have to protect minors from harmful content and all citizens from incitement to hatred under the current proposal for the revision of the Audiovisual Media Service Directive. Third, the protection of privacy. Updated rules on confidentiality of communication and privacy invasive tracking technologies have recently been published under our proposal to replace the e-privacy directive by a regulation. Fourth, given that data is the key resource also in the platform economy, the Commission has just recently presented an overview of emerging issues, such as who should have access to the vast quantities of data collected by online platforms. A public consultation is currently open to gather views on these important new topics. Further work is currently ongoing to examine how to fight against illegal content could be improved without imposing burdensome rules, which could harm innovation and potentially the emergence of new European platforms. The Digital Single Market midterm review planned for May 2017 will be a good moment to provide an update on progress, as well as the need for additional action. Let me end on a positive note. Europe has already produced many global success stories and a number of regional leaders. European startups have taken a lead in artificial intelligence, robotics, virtual reality and chip design. More than 1 million people participated last year in the EU Code Week to learn the basics of computer programming as part of the growing recognition that Europe should not only be consuming digital technologies but also creating competitive technologies for the future. We need to build on these emerging strengths by continuing and increasing our investment in innovation and by breaking down barriers in the single market so that homegrown talent can scale up and compete on a global stage. We have all the necessary talent, but we need to focus our energy on securing Europe's competitive future in a global competition. So as said before, we are dealing with emerging new phenomena in the market economy. And this new phenomena has the must have the same rights but also the obligations than traditional businesses. There is no need to create new institutional settings for regulating platform economy. And finally, we have to find right ways to incentivize this economic phenomena and at the same time create a regulatory environment which strengthen trust and confidence amongst the consumers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Commissioner. I'm looking at the program, and now I have a couple of minutes to make some remarks before I think, Andreas, you will take over because Mr. Juvin is not going to be present, if I understand correctly. I grew up before many of you in the 1970s. And you know, when I was a kid growing up, when you went to a store, you actually went to a store. You physically had to move to go buy something. There were, you know, maybe you could order something by the mail, you know, sending in and putting on a stamp. But and we used to speak with one another actually by looking at one another. I mean, a third of you the entire time have your head down, not because you're yet asleep, because you're actually extremely awake, but being somewhere else at the same time you're here. I think we call it now multitasking. We used to call it attention deficit. Now it's called multitasking. It's an asset. The point is, the world has changed radically because technology has changed. And buying something may mean actually going to a store, which I still do as much as I can. And sometimes it just means picking up your little telephone and pressing a few buttons, even paying it by pressing a few more buttons. The only problem we have is how many PIN codes we have for what application, and then we get them confused, and then sometimes we get locked out, as I have been before, because I obstinately stay on the same wrong code one time too many. But see, as the world has changed and the way that we're doing sales has changed, the legislation and regulation has not. Right? So we regulate business in the way that we have been doing it for many, many years. So there's a regulation for the hotel business, you know, with cleanliness, health standards, work agreements, social rights, welfare, et cetera. In the taxi business, it's the same. It's a heavily regulated. You have to pay lots of money to get the special permit, et cetera. But these technologies, which are extremely disruptive, are actually creating new opportunities to make money, new opportunities for us as consumers to perhaps get the good or the service in a quicker, easier, and cheaper fashion. But it's a little bit of an uneven playing field in some regard. How to deal with it? And Jyrki said correctly, right? We regulate it, and then when we kill it, we subsidize it. And I think the wrong approach is, you know, if it moves, regulate it. These sorts of technologies are, in many ways, an anti-regulatory reaction. Right? It's a way around obstacles, physical obstacles sometimes. But also Jyrki said it right, that in Europe we have very many borders. I mean, there's a statistic, we all love to misuse statistics. The one I'll misuse today, according to the Commission, is that of the online platform market in the world, the EU has about 4% of it. Even if that's remotely true, that's appalling. Because in terms of our economy, we are the single richest, most economy in the world, ahead of the US in terms of our combined economy, or our combined economies. And the problem is that, I mean, why is that happening? What are the Americans, say, doing, or the Asians doing that we're not doing? Are they more clever? Well, no, because most of the people who are Americans are actually Europeans or Asians anyway. So why are our companies being bought up and people going over there? It must be a different environment. And when you look at outward signs, like signs of venture capital funds, the average US fund is twice as large as the average European fund. And I think it really all comes down to size of market and regulatory blocks in the market. So if I'm a venture capitalist, say, be pleasant, and I'm going to fund a young startup that has a great idea, and that startup happens to be in Belgium, or I may find someone similar that would be in Germany. Oh, that's a much bigger market. Or say in Louisiana, well, as far as I'm aware in the US, although that may be changing, I don't know, with states in the federal government, but it's still one contiguous market in the US with about 350 million, less than us. Even after Britain leaves, less than us. The question is, what can we do to tear down those barriers to make that Belgium company, in all regards, be as competitive, theoretically, with the US startup? But actually with an advantage, because that Belgian company would be in a bigger internal market. And we know that we have the internal market, free flow of all of our 4 fundamental rights, and we're going to fight Theresa May tooth and nail for these rights. But if we're honest, we know that they actually don't work in all fields perfectly, and least of all in the digital field. So I think this is the big challenge, how to open it up, how to perhaps introduce some sort of regulation or improve the regulation, but without regulating it to death, letting it grow. To take from other markets that are successful and to try to take the good from them, because there's absolutely no reason in terms of human capital and potential. Europe is at the top of the game, at the A level. In terms of number of consumers, we're at the A+ level. In terms of wealth of the market, we are at the A+ level. So why are we at 4% of the market share? This is what we have to change and address, and I think this is, I mean, the communication from the Commission and the joint report from the ITRE, IMCO, so Henna Virkkunen and Philippe Jouvin, who is unfortunately not present this afternoon, is Parliament's first response. And I think that as we move forward and as legislation would come, that we keep an open mind to err on the side of under rather than err on the side of over-regulating. I think this is very important to keep in mind. So without any further ado, 5 minutes ahead of schedule, I will turn the floor over to my colleague, the coordinator in the IMCO committee, Andreas Schwab, to introduce and chair the first panel. So, thank you very much.
So, thank you so much, Christiane. Thank you so much, Vice President, for your introductory speeches. I think those who are familiar with EPP hearings, they know we are very precise. We have asked our guests to be very clear and to be limited to 7 minutes. We hope that that's fine, because we want to allow you to ask questions and to assess the situation yourself. I have to tell you that unfortunately our rapporteur from the Internal Market Committee, who is doing the report together with Henna Virkkunen from the Industry Committee, is ill today and can't come, and therefore, if you don't mind, I will start on the basis of the notes he gave to me, a little introduction to this panel without knowing or without being able to answer directly to what has been said beforehand. Philippe is extremely concerned in the same way as Christianis has already pointed out, because he believes that a central role of platforms in the digital economy is an issue that has also been dealt with politicians. Therefore, he definitely would like to have a deepened reflection today on what platforms are looking alike, what sort of platforms we have, and we had already a debate on beforehand as to whether we can achieve at least a direction after this hearing how platforms should be defined, which is for sure very difficult, because we see a very fast-moving market. We see a very broad diversification of platforms, and therefore we take all the reluctance not to go too far, but on the same time we also have to give an answer on what are we really talking about when addressing platforms. Philippe, more generally, is having the view or the question as to whether platforms will become the driver of not only the digital but the whole economy in future, because they are, as has already been pointed out by Christianis and the Commissioner, they are a very useful tool to make the best choices with very short ways. You just have to move your fingers. And therefore, there is for sure a digital revolution that may touch not only this digital part of the economy, but the whole economy very quickly. So in a certain way, these are his main reflections. And having taken his comments, I should then shortly introduce our speakers. I don't know where to, I will follow the list on the paper, if you don't mind. It's Yann Bonnet, who is the Secretary General of the Digital Council from France. It's Augustin Reyna, the Digital Team Leader from the European Consumer Association, BEUC. It's Marine Egrichi, she's Head of Public Policy with Spotify Europe. It's John Steinberg, he's Public Policy and Government Relations Manager with Google. And finally, Werner Stenk, who is the Head of Unit at the European Commission from DG Connect, who is reflecting and working on the platforms. So we are looking forward to very clear and very interesting comments, and I think we should start with Yann Bonnet for 7 minutes. Please.
Merci, bonjour à tous.
Thank you very much,
Aujourd'hui,
and good afternoon.
je vais vous parler de deux enjeux très
Well, I
importants
wanted
à
to
nos
talk to
yeux
you
au
about
Conseil national du numérique.
important challenges
Pour
today,
nous, pour
things that we
réussir dans
find
une économie
important at
de
the National
plateforme,
Digital Council.
il y a deux enjeux majeurs.
To have
Le premier qui est
a platform economy,
comment
there are
accompagner
two
nos
major
PME
challenges, we
à se
believe.
développer
Firstly,
dans
how
ce nouveau
to
cadre.
support
Et
our
le deuxième enjeu,
SMEs
c'est
when it comes to
comment
their
assurer la
development under this new
loyauté des
framework, and
relations entre les
secondly,
plateformes
how
et
to ensure
leur écosystème.
fair
Sur le premier enjeu concernant
relations
les
between
PME,
platforms and their ecosystems.
on
Now,
part d'un
firstly,
premier
with regard to
constat,
the
c'est
SMEs,
nos politiques publiques dans l'ensemble ont aujourd'hui
there's
intégré
a
l'enjeu
new
de
public policy
soutenir
now
le développement
which
des startups.
aims to support
Il
the
y a,
development of
en Europe,
startups.
chaque année à peu près le même nombre de startups qu'aux
In Europe
États-Unis
every year,
ou en Asie.
You
On a
have as
des
many startups
succès,
starting up as you do in
Spotify,
the
en
US
fait, qui est
and
représenté
Asia. We do have some
ici,
successes.
Zalando, en
Spotify
Allemagne,
from
Sigfox,
Sweden,
en
Xanadu
France.
from
Il reste
Germany,
encore des efforts à faire
Sigfox in
pour
France,
permettre aux
but we do
startups
have
de grandir,
efforts
notamment en
that
matière
still
de
need to be
financement.
made to enable
Rapporté au
startups
PIB,
to
le poids
grow,
du capital
particularly when it
risque en
comes
France
to
est 4
financing.
fois inférieur à celui
Risk
des US
capital
ou de la Chine.
levels are 4 times
Trop
lower in
de
France than they are in the US or China, and too many
vont se financer
European
aux États-Unis
startups get their
et
funding
doivent en
from the
contrepartie
United
se
States.
localiser aux États-Unis.
And that then
Et
means, of
on
course,
assiste
that
à
they
un
have to
véritable
locate
siphonnage
themselves in the
des
United
pépites
States.
européennes.
And
Et donc il faut
so
qu'on
we're
trouve un certain
seeing
nombre de solutions en termes de
a
financement et
drain
notamment
of these kinds
peut-être
of startups to the United
réorienter
States. So we
l'épargne
need to look into
vers
this
le
financing
financement
and
des startups et de
try
l'innovation.
and
On a un
look
autre
to better finance startups and
endroit où il faut
innovation.
qu'on progresse, c'est en
Another
matière de
place
réglementation.
where we need to
On
do
doit
better
continuer un
is with
dialogue
regard
entre les
to
États membres
regulation. We
pour
need
avoir une
to
vision
continue a
commune
dialogue between
et
member states so we can
sur
have
le
a
numérique et
common
essayer de
vision
défragmenter
on
un certain nombre de
the digital
réglementations
sector
pour
and
simplifier la vie
try
des
and
startups,
simplify the
des
lives
entrepreneurs
of
du numérique.
startups
Mais
and
globalement, les
digital
politiques
businessmen.
ont intégré cet enjeu en
essentially,
Europe concernant les startups.
Politics
Par contre,
has
on est un peu plus
taken
inquiet
on this
concernant
stuff with
les
regard
PME.
to startups, but we do have more of a
C'est le
problem when it
deuxième
comes
constat.
to
On
SMEs, more of a
observe
concern
une trop
there,
faible
and this
prise
is
en
my
compte
second
de
point.
l'enjeu de la transformation de nos PME
To
au sein de l'Union
SMEs
européenne. En France,
have too little
les
account
PME,
taken
c'est
of them at the
99% des
EU level.
entreprises, c'est 50% de l'emploi.
99% of businesses in France are SMEs, a large
Mais le numérique
percentage of
concerne aussi
employment.
toutes les PME, il ne faut pas l'oublier.
Because digital,
Et,
okay, relates to
l'entrée dans
startups,
l'économie
but
de
actually it relates to all
on change
SMEs.
un certain nombre de
And
règles de
when
jeu.
you move
On
towards
doit
platforms,
chercher
then
la
the rules of the
relation client, on
game
doit gagner en
change a little bit. You
visibilité.
have to
Et
look for
ça, c'est un
client
certain
relations, you
nombre
have to
de
gain
culture à
visibility.
faire,
And that's
pousser au
a
niveau
cultural
des
change that
PME.
needs to be
On a
boosted
travaillé sur ce
for
sujet cette année
SMEs.
au
Now
Conseil
we
national
worked
du numérique.
on this
On va
subject
rendre
this year
dans quelques jours
at
un
the
avis
National
au
Digital
gouvernement
Council,
français.
and in a few
On
days
a
we're
été
going
surpris
to
d'un
be
certain
providing
nombre
an opinion to the
d'opportunités qui sont
government,
inexploitées
to the French government, and we've been
cas,
amazed
par
that there are certain
exemple,
opportunities that
e-export.
aren't used
e-export, c'est la
in
vente
France.
en ligne à
E-export, for
l'étranger.
example,
Seulement
selling
5%
abroad
des entreprises en
online.
France
Only
font
5% of French
aujourd'hui du
businesses
e-export. Et donc
are
là,
involved in
on voit qu'il y a encore
exporting.
un levier,
so,
des marges de progrès énormes.
significant
Les
progress can
recommandations
still
sur
be
ce
made.
sujet très rapidement, c'est
Recommendations on the
l'idée, c'est
subject very briefly.
d'améliorer l'offre d'accompagnement. En tout
idea
cas, en
is
France, on
to,
voit que sur les territoires, l'accompagnement est
provide
très
support,
hétérogène. Et
you can see
aussi,
there are very different levels of
une
support
remarque,
depending on where you are geographically
on
in
voit
France.
que pour
And
les
then a
petits
further
commerçants, par
comment, we
exemple, pour un
see
certain
that
nombre de
for
PME,
small
il y a un besoin de
traders, for
financement,
some
notamment
SMEs,
de
there is a need
l'immatériel,
for
pour des
funding,
petits montants
particularly
entre 5 000 et 15 000 euros. Il existe un
for amounts
dispositif
that are between
européen qui
15,
s'appelle le ICT
5 and
Innovation
15
Voucher. Mais
thousand
en
euros.
fait,
There is
d'après les
ICT
retours qu'on a,
Innovation
les obligations de reporting
Innovation
sur ces
Fund
aides
that does
sont
assist
si
with
élevées
that,
que le
but
coût de gestion en fait, dépasse souvent le montant de
often
l'enveloppe
management
globale
costs
qui peut
are
délivrer.
higher than
On
the
pense
amount
qu'il y a
that can be
un
gained.
probablement des choses à
So there
simplifier
is a problem
sur ce
there, and
dispositif
simplification is
d'ICT
needed
Innovation
with regard
Alors,
to
le
this
deuxième enjeu
ICT Innovation Fund.
sur lequel on voulait insister
Now, the
aujourd'hui,
second challenge that we wanted to focus on today
c'est l'enjeu en
is
fait de la loyauté
the challenge
des relations entre
of
les plateformes et
loyal
les
and
acteurs de
fair
leur
relations
écosystème.
between platforms
On fait un
and
premier
those
constat
who are part
qui
of
est
their
que nous devons
ecosystem. And the
rétablir en fait un
first
équilibre
comment is that we need
entre
to
les plateformes et
re-establish a
les
balance
entreprises
between the
qui en
platforms
dépendent.
and the businesses that
Les
depend on them.
plateformes ont aujourd'hui développé un pouvoir
Platforms
extrêmement
have
important sur des
developed
secteurs tout entiers.
significant power across
Par
whole
exemple,
sectors
Uber
now.
peut
For
fixer
example,
les tarifications des
can
VTC
set
dans nos villes. Google peut
the
diminuer
prices
le
of
chiffre
trips
d'affaires
in
d'une entreprise
our
en modifiant ses
cities.
politiques de
Google
référencement.
can reduce the
Twitter peut
turnover of a
décider de changer
business
son API
by
et ainsi
reducing
avoir un droit de vie ou de mort sur
how many
toute une
hits
série
it gets.
d'entreprises qui ont développé des services de cette base. Pour prendre un parallèle, c'est
And
comme si
there are
une
other
entreprise
businesses that can
comme,
do similar things in other
qui génère de l'électricité
For
en France, par
example,
exemple
it'd be as
EDF,
if an
décidait du
electricity
jour au lendemain
company,
de changer
EDF
le
in France,
voltage ou la tension de
decided
son
to change
électricité
the
sur le réseau.
voltage or
Vous
the
pouvez
tension
imaginer toutes les
of
PME sur le
its
territoire qui
electricity
fermeraient.
right across the
Ben là,
network.
c'est
You
la
imagine how
même
many
chose en fait
SMEs
sur les
would
API,
shut
c'est les géants
down
du numérique,
across
ces
France.
plateformes, si elles changent
And platforms
brutalement
have
leurs
similar
API,
powers.
ça peut entraîner la mort d'un certain
They
nombre de
change
startups.
what they do
Apple peut
suddenly,
aussi
then
imposer un taux de
certain
prélèvement sur les
startups
ventes
can simply
d'applications
disappear.
et de musique.
Apple can
Donc
also
on voit que
charge
face à
money
ce
when it
pouvoir
comes to
croissant des
sales of music,
plateformes
etc.
sur
So
leur
they do have a great deal
écosystème,
of power,
nous on pense qu'il
increasingly.
faut
And
absolument
given
développer le
that, we
principe de
believe
loyauté.
that
Alors
a
le principe de
principle of
loyauté, c'est
fairness
demander
needs
aux
to be
plateformes
developed,
de
and
dire
that
ce qu'elles font,
involves
de faire ce qu'elles disent
platforms
et de permettre aux
saying
utilisateurs
what they
de
do and
contrôler.
doing what they say they're going to do, and
Google est
ensuring
devenu
that
un
users
espace de
can check
visibilité
that.
incontournable. Il y a
Google
93% des
has
recherches en
become
Europe qui se font
essential when it
via
comes to
Google.
visibility.
C'est très bien, mais donc aussi il est normal
93%
de
of
pouvoir demander un peu
businesses
plus de
increase their
transparence sur le
visibility
fonctionnement
via Google, but then I think
de
that's
l'algorithme.
fine, but we need a bit more
Donc,
transparency
le deuxième
on
constat
the
qu'on fait, c'est
algorithm.
que les plateformes
A
bénéficient
further
d'effets
comment
de
is
réseau
that platforms
qui réduisent la
benefit
possibilité
from
de les
networking
concurrencer.
effects, which make it more difficult to
Cela peut
compete
se
with them.
traduire par des effets de lock-in très importants.
This can
L'utilité que l'on peut tirer
produce
d'un réseau
significant
social comme
blocking
Facebook
effects.
dépend
For
bien évidemment
example,
du fait qu'il est utilisé par tout le monde.
Facebook's
Et
power
on
depends on the
rentre
fact that
très
it's used by
facilement dans
everyone.
une logique de winner
You can
takes
very
all.
easily get into a kind of
Dans le
winner
cadre des
takes all
plateformes, une
situation.
nouvelle difficulté s'ajoute à
When it
l'effet
comes to
de réseau,
platforms,
c'est celui de l'accès
there's a
aux
further
données
difficulty,
nécessaires
which is
pour offrir un
access to the
service
data
et
that
entrer
is
sur un
necessary
marché.
to offer a service.
On
and
l'observe tout
get into a market.
particulièrement sur le développement
And
des
that's
solutions basées sur
something
l'intelligence
that can
artificielle,
particularly be seen
notamment
when it comes to
machine
solutions
learning,
based on
qui nécessite de
artificial
pouvoir confronter les
intelligence and
algorithmes
particularly
qu'on a
machine
développés
learning,
à des données pour les
because the
faire apprendre.
algorithms
Or, les
developed need
principaux collecteurs
constantly
de données
to have
sont
access
nos
to
terminaux, par
data to
exemple les
continue
mobiles.
to learn.
Et une poignée
But,
d'entreprises se partagent
Data
l'essentiel des
is
parts de marché
gathered
des
in
systèmes
terminals,
d'exploitation,
and essentially there are very few
iOS,
businesses
Android ou Microsoft.
that share
Le
most
risque avec une
of the data
concentration des bases
generated,
de données et
iOS,
des
Android, and
capacités de les
Microsoft,
exploiter
for
est que
example.
nous soyons tous demain des
So
locataires
we
de
need
ces
data,
capacités.
and we need to be able to use
Et
it,
donc là, je voudrais faire le lien avec
and there needs to be
le
more
free flow
access
of
to it.
data,
And
sur lequel
here
on parle beaucoup dans les accords commerciaux. Nous, on est très méfiants
I
vis-à-vis
want
de ce
to make a
concept
link,
de cross-border data flow.
with regard
On pense qu'il faut
to
pas
cross-border
cranter un
data
système
flows that are
juridique qui figerait
mentioned
la
in many trade
situation.
agreements.
Les
We
silos
don't
de données sont
think
déjà
that
constitués côté plateforme.
legislation
on
should
peut
deal with
procéder
that. I mean, there are
complètement autrement
data
pour le développement
silos
de
on
l'IoT,
platforms already, but
de
we
l'intelligence
could
artificielle ou
act
de la
differently when it comes to
de la
developing IoT,
numérisation
artificial
de l'industrie.
intelligence, or the
Et sur ces terrains,
digitalization of
l'Union européenne a
industry.
des capacités
And
importantes,
here, the European
des
Union could
infrastructures de
have
qualité,
significant
des tissus
capacities.
industriels à fort savoir-faire et des laboratoires en intelligence de haut niveau. Et donc, il faut prévenir la constitution
So
de
I think
ces
what we
nouveaux
need to
silos
do
détenus par une
is
poignée d'entreprises,
establish
décidant du sort de milliers d'autres.
is to
Et
deal
donc,
with these
nous souhaitons
silos
éviter
that
des erreurs
of
stratégiques pour
information
les
that are
acteurs
held by
européens
some
comme le
businesses
Safe
and
Harbor.
that
Nous, on pense que ça a été une
decide the
erreur.
fate of many others.
Nous
I
devons
mean,
être très vigilants
we
sur
need to be
le
careful. For
cross-border
example,
data flow
Safe Harbor
à
was
l'avenir.
an error,
Donc
we
notre
believe, and
recommandation
to avoid
sur
those
ce
kinds of
deuxième
errors, we
volet,
need to be very
c'est de
careful when it comes to
favoriser la
data flow
concurrence
in the
et
future. So
l'ouverture du
our
marché par la
recommendation is to
notation
boost
des pratiques des
market
plateformes
opening and
et le
competition
droit à la portabilité
by
des données.
rating
Nous appelons à
platforms
une
and a
forte
right to data
réactivité des
portability.
outils
We
antitrust.
think that
On voit que
antitrust
cela fait plus
legislation
déjà
should
plus de
be
8 ans
far
que nous
more
travaillons sur le
flexible.
cas de
We've been
Google
working on
et
the
10 ans
Google
sur
framework for over
Microsoft.
8 years
C'est
now,
complètement incompatible avec le cycle
and
des marchés
that is
actuel.
completely incompatible with
Afin
market
d'identifier
cycles
plus
today.
rapidement les
So we need
problématiques
to be able to
émergentes
identify
autour des
emerging
plateformes,
problems
nous,
more
on
quickly with
propose de
regard
créer une
to
sorte d'agence
platforms.
de
And in order
notation
to
des,
do that,
des
we believe there
pratiques
should
des
be a
plateformes
kind of
pour
rating
faire levier
agency
sur le levier de
for
la
platforms
réputation
activities
et pour
so
inciter les
that
plateformes à
that
adopter des bonnes
can
pratiques en matière de loyauté.
push them
C'est ce
to
qu'on est en train de
develop
faire
good
en ce moment,
practices
on est
in
en train
terms of
d'expérimenter en
fairness
France
because
ce
of the
sujet
reputational
d'agence de
risk. In
notation des
France, we're
plateformes.
already looking
On est
at
en
this
train
idea of having a rating
co-concevoir
agency
avec un
for
certain nombre
platforms.
d'acteurs des
We're
indicateurs, des comparables,
co-designing
utiles pour les entreprises,
designing
utiles
indicators,
pour les startups,
comparatives,
utiles
etc.,
pour les
which will be
VC,
useful for
sur les
businesses,
conditions de
startups,
référencement, sur les
etc.,
conditions d'accès aux
on
API,
funding
des API, la
conditions,
stabilité des relations. Et
conditions
donc
of
l'idée, c'est
access,
d'appliquer
stability
la
of
logique de
relations, and the
plateforme aux
idea
plateformes
is to
elles-mêmes
apply
pour
the
rendre le
logic
marché
of
plus
platforms
transparent. C'est
to
essentiel pour
platforms to try
l'entrepreneuriat.
and make the market
On
more
a besoin de
transparent. It's
permettre aux
essential
personnes
for
qui seront demain en
entrepreneurs
situation de dépendance
to have
vis-à-vis des
information,
plateformes de mieux maîtriser
and
leur
it's
prise de
important
risque.
that people
Et
who
enfin, pour
tomorrow will
terminer,
be
pour
dependent on a
faciliter les choix des
platform to better know what they're getting
consommateurs et
into.
des
And to
entreprises,
conclude, we need to
il nous
make it
semble
easier
extrêmement
for
important de
consumers to make
consacrer le droit à
choices,
la portabilité
and
des données.
therefore the
Cela
right
permettra
to
de
the
de
portability
faciliter
of
le
data is
passage
very
d'une plateforme à
important.
une autre et de
This
favoriser les
will
mouvements de
enable
données
people to move
cross-plateforme.
from one platform to
Donc
another
voilà par exemple un
and
bon
boost
exemple
the
de
movement
position
of
offensive à pousser
cross-platform data. So
dans
this
les
is
accords
something
commerciaux.
that could be pushed in
Plutôt
trade
que le
agreements, for
cross-border
example,
data flow, nous on
as
pourrait
an
appeler au
offensive
cross-platform data flow
requirement.
pour,
This could be called,
et
for
je pense que ça
example,
pourrait aider
cross-platform
énormément
data
les
flow, and I
acteurs
think that
européens.
could really help
Merci.
European players. Thank you very much.
Merci à vous, Monsieur Bonnet, pour votre introduction
Thank you very much,
de
Mr.
la
Bonnet,
situation en France.
for that
Maintenant,
introduction
on
to the
va entendre
situation
Augustine
in France.
Reina.
Now we're going to hear from Augustine Reina.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Members of the EPP Group, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting BEUC to share our views on the ongoing debates around online platforms. Online platforms bring obvious benefits to consumers. Consumers use them to book flights and accommodation, interact with their peers on social media, search and compare products, buy those products, and access and share content online. However, in this complex ecosystem, not everything is working as it should. And what is not working is generally at a B2B level. As shown in the preliminary results of the European Commission consultation on online platforms, a large majority of respondents have encountered or are aware of problems faced by consumers or suppliers when dealing with online platforms. This is caused on one side by the uncertainty of the rules that are currently applicable to the platforms and by the lack of enforcement. Lack of enforcement, which is often linked to the lack of legal certainty. Some important questions that were mentioned before, I can only echo them, relates to, are platforms sufficiently transparent about their business models? Are platforms such as search engines and comparison sites giving consumers impartial information based on what is best for consumers? Are dominant platforms imposing unfair terms and conditions on their users and providers? There is no one solution to solve all these issues raised by platforms, given the variety of platforms operating in online markets. However, we have identified some consumer concerns, which could be present horizontally across online markets. First problem is the lack of transparency and impartiality. Transparency around marketing and advertising practices is a common consumer concern. The difference between advertising, promoted or sponsored content, and normal content is not clear. This makes it hard for consumers to understand what are they actually seeing on the screen. For example, a study published by Ofcom in 2015 showed that the majority of teenagers could not tell the difference between ads and normal search results in Google. There is also a need for more transparency regarding how information and offers are ranked and displayed by search engines, comparison sites, and online booking platforms. For example, consumers might think the offer they are seeing first in the list of the ranking is based on the value or the relevance, while the reality might be that certain provider has paid for its offer to be promoted. Just to give you an example, Booking.com, the default ranking is recommended. And according to the terms of use of Booking.com, the default ranking is created through a fully automatic ranking system, the algorithm, and based on multiple criteria. At no point consumers are informed about what these multiple criteria are or how the traders are selected. The second point of concern relates to trustworthiness of peer-to-peer information. Platforms are positioning themselves as trusted partners for consumers, but this trust needs to have a solid basis. The issues around fake reviews, for example, paid endorsement, and the suppression of negative reviews are a particular concern. For example, our UK member, which has questioned whether Amazon reviews can be trusted. Booking platform offers reserve the right to use, adjust, refuse, or remove customers' reviews at their own discretion. If the governance system that rules the reviews platforms is not transparent and reliable, reviews could be easily lead to manipulation and end up misleading consumers. Therefore, platforms that host user reviews should have appropriate system to take fake new reviews and ensure that advertising content is identified as appropriate. The third point related to platform is linked to liability, which is something that has been always mentioned. Although BEUC does not consider as such, we need to question the concept of liability of the e-commerce directive. It will be necessary to inquire the need or to look at the question of contractual liability related to the provision of a service by a third party. And this will be particularly important, for example, in the context of the collaborative economy, who is responsible in case of lack of conformity of the services that the consumer is accessing, but is provided by a third party. The fourth concern relates to privacy and data portability, something that you mentioned and is extremely important. Users are constantly tracking and being profiled. This data is shared with third parties and often without the sufficient concern. Some platforms are even tracking consumers who are not users of its own services, as illustrated, for example, in the recent case in Belgium against Facebook. Portability of data is also an important issue for both privacy and competition. In line with Article 20, for example, of the General Data Protection Regulation, consumers should be able to retrieve their personal data and take it with them from one platform to another. This is essential from the point of view of ensuring that consumers remain in control of their personal data, but also to avoid lock-in effects. The last point I would like to mention relates to competition in online markets. Healthy competition is essential for consumer welfare. We all know that. However, competition concerns arise on different levels in relation to the online platforms or online platform ecosystems. For example, there could be competition concerns related to how the platform treats their own suppliers, but also vis-a-vis other competitors. In the online platform ecosystem, it's very easy to develop a dominant position. And due to the use of algorithms, it's even easier to abuse of that dominance. Price collusion does not happen anymore in smoky rooms. It takes place online by machines programmed by humans. Today, national competition authorities face one of the biggest challenges in the history of competition law enforcement, which is trying to identify such behaviors and apply the appropriate remedies. At the starting point could be to look at the contractual relationships between the different online players. Currently, the B2B conditions imposed by certain platforms, for example, owning app stores or e-commerce platforms, are very concerning. This is because dominant platforms can use them to restrict market access and disadvantage competitors with the consequent negative effects that it has on consumers, less choice and eventually higher prices. Recent examples include the use of parity clauses in hotel booking websites and the complaint, for example, filed by Disconnect against Google for banning Disconnect's app from Google's Play Store. Other examples include the concerns raised, for example, by Spotify with regard to Apple's App Store policy regarding subscription on third-party apps. But this is something that my colleague from Spotify can elaborate more. So what to do next? And I will finalize with this. BEUC recommends to the Internal Market and Consumer Protection Committee and the rapporteur, of course, to look at platforms from a user perspective. What is happening at EU level, at B2B level, in platform is impacting directly B2C relationships. In this regard, we will recommend A, to adopt a better enforcement agenda for the EU. It is necessary to improve the enforcement of the existing legal framework. Regulators such as consumer protection authorities, competition authorities, and data protection authorities must seek to work together, both at national and at EU level. And in a second layer, analyze the regulatory gaps and adapt the legal framework. There is a long list of outstanding initiatives, what we have been referred before. All these initiatives are important to achieve a comprehensive and coherent consumer protection framework, which guarantees a high level of protection no matter the type of platform or service that you're using. While comparable services should be subject to similar comparable rules, ensuring a level playing field between traditional services and new online platforms should not result in a leveling down existing protection measures. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Augustin, for this also extremely clear presentation. And next one is Marine Elgrichi, or Elgrichi, no? Elgrichi from Spotify, please.
Hi, thank you very much for having me here and for having the opportunity to share Spotify. Oh, sorry. Better now? Cool. So thank you very much for having me here and have the opportunity to share Spotify view on online platforms. You know, at Spotify, we're very proud to be a European company and that the European digital music industry is a global success. I think today's discussion is important and crucial, given the rise of online platforms, and I would like to talk about three key things. First, I will highlight the success of the European digital music industry. Second, how online platform plays a crucial role today for our services. And third, I would love to discuss policy solution. So, you know, when Spotify was founded 10 years ago, it was at a time where the music industry was completely collapsing. But weirdly, people were consuming more and more music. And the idea of Martin Lorentzon and Daniel Ek when they founded Spotify is that they could bring a solution that would be better than piracy, that would address consumer needs, and that would pay fairly the creators' community. And this is how this is the basic idea behind Spotify. 10 years after, the global music industry is growing for the first time by 3.8%. And it's not only it's a global growth, but it's only in all markets in Europe. Recently, the French music industry has announced a growth of 6%, which has never been seen in the past 10 years. So this is great, and this is a global success, but this is not only Spotify's success. It's the success of many European companies like Deezer, but also we see in the ecosystem great innovative companies like Shazam or SoundCloud that are contributing to the leadership of Europe in the digital music industry. So I think it's really important to understand that we have great companies in Europe that are growing and that are global success. And you know, just in terms of number, I will give you the latest numbers about Spotify. We have convinced more than 100 million users across the globe to use Spotify. We have paid back more than 5 billion euros to the creators community since our creation. So I think, for those reasons, digital music industry should be a strategic priority for Europe. And when we think about digital music industry, it's really important to think about the role of online platform. So, today, certain online platforms play an essential role in the way in which digital service interact with consumers. For example, when we launched Spotify, it was, on the web. We didn't need anyone's approval, but I think it was 4 or 5 years ago where we have seen a switch in consumer behavior where people experience and use Spotify more and more on mobile device. And there is this statistic from the European Commission, the time spent online on mobile increased from 13% to to 65% in between 2008 and 2015. So, you know, online platforms are critical for us to reach consumers. They are critical for consumers to reach the service they want to use. However, there is a major problem that arises when online platforms, which are the main gateway to consumers, turn into a gatekeeper. And this is even more problematic when this online platform could have an incentive to discriminate when they compete in the downstream market. So, you know, and it's not something new. We had this discussion 10 years ago when we're talking about operating system and browsers. Today we're talking about mobile digital platform. Tomorrow we're going to talk about artificial intelligence or virtual reality. So I think this discussion is essential because we need to set precedent not just for today but also for the future. And this is why I would love now to move on to the policy solution I would like to discuss with you. Today, we are lacking of quick, low-cost regulatory instrument to address the potential violation and abuse of market of online platforms. We believe that the European Parliament and the policymaker needs to act now and have a huge responsibility to ensure to have an open and fair digital single market. And I think that any legislative solution should be based on a set of principles that are simple, agile, but remain relevant for the long term. We have identified 3 such principles. The first one is transparency. And you know, I know you've talked about transparency. We would like to be able to communicate in a transparent way with our customer about our pricing, our offers, our terms and conditions. We would like the online platforms to be transparent in their terms and condition process of approval. The second principle is non-discrimination. All services should be treated in the same way. For example, platform providers should not impose fees on supplier or consumer that exceed reasonable cost of providing access to this platform. And I think that the third, and I think, Agustin, you pointed something, competition is really related to consumer choice. And we believe that the third principle should be consumer choice because online platforms should respect consumer choice as to consumers' preferred supplier of digital content service. Platform must allow consumer to decide among the options regarding, for example, payment system, default setting, or data management. So to conclude here, I think that, you know, at the heart of the digital single market, we should ensure today a level playing field, an open and fair market based on 3 principles: non-discrimination, transparency, and consumer choice. This is important to make sure that European services have a market in which they can grow, that consumers have a market in which they can trust, and we have a huge responsibility now to ensure a vibrant digital economy in Europe. So thanks so much for having us today and the opportunity to speak about that.
Thank you very much, Marine. This was very clear. And now we have John here, who has also 7 minutes. John Steinberg, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. And I have some slides. Thank you so much for having me here. I'm going to talk about a range of the issues that have already been discussed, but also, apologies.
I can help you, but I don't know where to point at.
Here we go. Thank you. So the first thing I just wanted to say was that I think sometimes when we talk about platforms, we forget all of the fantastic European success stories. And here are just a small number of examples of European companies that are world beaters in terms of providing products and services to businesses and consumers. They have, and one of the challenges of the debate around online platforms is that these businesses have a range of business models. So it's very difficult to find what they have in common in order to regulate them. Some are two-sided markets, some are multi-sided markets, some are technology solutions, and some provide simple consumer services. And they all do that in different ways. And the European Commission's communication on online platforms really came to terms with this challenge. They attempted to come up with a definition in their consultation, and unfortunately it suffered widespread criticism from across the ecosystem, as well as from member states and member state regulators. And the European Parliament's own report confirmed that a one-size-fits-all approach will not work. And I think essentially what it comes down to is in order for you to have effective regulation, you need a definition which is both can be validated and can be invalidated. So you can say something is a platform and something clearly isn't a platform. And I think unfortunately, we've yet to come up with a solution to that challenge. But I think the Commission's communication on this was very clear that the solutions need to be driven towards solving problems. The other thing that happens in this debate around online platforms is often we discuss them as if these are unregulated businesses, that the internet itself is unregulated, that it's like the Wild West. And that's unfortunately just not true. We know that under European legislation, we have the e-commerce directive, we have the AVMS, GDPR, telecoms regulation, consumer protections, that all point to sector-specific and issue-specific regulation. And on top of that, online services are, of course, subject to a wide range of commercial legislation, whether it's about contracts or other issues. And what we have with the online ecosystem is an evolving governance ecosystem. And that model continues to evolve. And the European Commission's communication got this very right when they said that future measures should address these clearly identified problems. So not only do we have the regulation that I just mentioned, but we have a patchwork of co- and self-regulatory measures which address a lot of the issues that have been raised today and previously. So whether that's the hate speech code of conduct that many online companies signed last year, ICANN's management of the internet infrastructure, the Global Network Initiative, which deals with transparency requirements, or the IAB on advertising standards, and that's just to name just a few. On top of that, I think it's important to recognize many of the benefits that online platforms bring to the European economy. Oxera published a study on this issue and found that consumers benefit in many of the ways shown here. They also importantly found no evidence of user lock-in, the idea that users are trapped in one service. In fact, they found that consumers multi-home, that they use more than one service for the same purpose across 4 main tasks, which are to communicate with friends and family, to browse posts, videos, and photos, to buy products from general marketplaces, and to find information about and compare products and services in the travel sector. And those benefits also extend to businesses, where Oxera found that businesses successfully use platforms for a range of purposes, including raising capital, conducting e-commerce, their marketing activities, building reputation and trust, recruitment to find new staff, and for internal management processes. And as I'm here from Google, I should say a minute about our own services here in Europe. We believe very strongly that Google is a growth engine for European businesses. Every day we help hundreds of thousands of businesses to connect with new customers, to grow their business, to work more efficiently, and to be more successful. And we're very proud of the role that we play in the European economy in that way. But we also think it's essential that more small businesses acquire the skills in order to take advantage of these online tools and services. That's why we've been a leading member of the Digital Skills and Jobs Coalition for a number of years now, and in its previous iterations through the Grand Coalition. We pledged 2 years ago that we would train 2 million Europeans in digital skills, and we're proud to announce this past December that we have achieved that goal ahead of schedule. And we were very proud, as you see here in the photo, to receive an award from Commissioner Oettinger, a award for best practice on our activities. But we also recognize that we have a role to play as a responsible partner in this ecosystem, and I wanted to mention a couple of areas where we believe that we are acting as a responsible partner. So one of them is around creators in the content industry, and we're really keen to help creators grow online and benefit from digital tools. You can see here that we've invested $60 million in new tools to help creators and the content industry to manage their copyright online. We're working hard to remove content from search that violates copyright laws, and you can see that we removed 98% of requested removals within 6 hours in 2015. And we're also constantly working to improve our ads and to remove those that violate our policies. In addition to that, we share significant revenue with the content industry and help to ensure that creators can thrive online. And you can see here a few of those stats, including in 2016 alone, we paid out $1 billion to the music industry through YouTube. And finally, I just wanted to mention another area which I know has been of concern, which is around illegal content, terrorism, and hate speech. We were proud to sign up to the EU Code of Conduct on illegal hate speech last year, and we are proud to live up to our commitments, and I'd be happy to discuss those in greater detail later, as well as we launched an industry-led initiative around hash sharing, which is around terrorism content. We announced that in December, and this will be a system to ensure that terrorism content online, we will share that information between platforms to try to make it even more efficient to removing that kind of content from our services. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, John, raising a lot of points that are of interest to the later debate. And now the final floor is with Werner Stenck from the European Commission. Please.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. Hard to add anything to what has been said this whole afternoon already. If you look into the Commission's approach to that already outlined by the Vice President, I think it's a very balanced approach. And if you look into that communication, already the ordering of the chapters is not a coincidence. So it actually starts with the objective to set the right environment to attract, retain, and grow online platforms. And only the next chapter deals with a balanced regulatory framework to fix any issues that may arise. And that's really the spirit within which we work and think, even though, as you know, platforms, when you have platforms discussions these days, and in certain member states in particular, it would probably be a less innovation-friendly platform debate and more a problem-focused platform debate. But we're really starting with an innovation thought, and we are acknowledging the major contribution that platforms have been making to the economy, to society, to citizens, to consumers. So, I mean, I don't have to say much more about that. You all know what platforms can do in order, if they function well, if the ecosystem is healthy, as we all say, and that's really what I would also subscribe to as an objective, a healthy ecosystem, where all parties to that ecosystem draw benefits in a fair and in equal way. So information asymmetry is going down, supply and demand being matched much better than before, resources being pulled and freed, valorized, if you take the sharing economy, that people can just make a bit money out of their home when they don't use it, and so on and so forth. So therefore, a big yes to the innovation agenda, and that's of course lots of policies backing that up, whether it's the DSM strategy as such that tries to eliminate barriers to the single market, whether it's all the research and funding that goes into the sector, whether it's infrastructure work on networks, on spectrum, on 5G, what have you. So lots of things are meant to create framework conditions which would indeed allow those many European startups, and I fully agree with the chair, there's lots of startups in Europe that they can not only start up but also scale up. Now then, of course, we cannot turn a blind eye to issues that arise, and it would be a miracle if in such a revolution, if you want, there were no policy challenges emerging. And the challenge is to address them in a balanced way and not shoot from the hip and in a way that you don't really master the consequences, understand the consequences. So in that sense, we were not paying lip service, and we said that we're willing, of course, to look into the issues, but we would try to identify the problems as thoroughly as we can, and then suggest remedies where they are needed. So problem-driven, evidence-based, case by case, sounds obvious, but probably is not so obvious all the time. Now, if ever we were, and I'm coming to some of the policy areas in a minute, if we were to come up with, let's say, legislative solutions, I think it's pretty clear that we're talking about a new generation of legislation compared to the old economy. You would need something light touch, you would need something flexible, you would need something that is as technologically neutral as can be, simply because the world around us is moving so fast, and we should not come with excessively burdensome and slow and inflexible policy responses where they are needed. Now, you saw also in the communication a few of the areas we are looking into, certain things about level playing field, which has to be, of course, I could spend hours now on defining what is a level playing field and what should that mean in this context. It's about responsibility, it's about fairness, it's about non-discrimination. We heard some of the principles already. Now, there were two areas where we announced follow-up work in the communication. Just a few words on those that you know where we are on this. The first one, I would say this the fairness pillar, and it was mentioned by some of the speakers and also by the colleague from Spotify. It is the platform to business relations, and also BEUC said they're very interested in that because this inevitably translates into the B2C experience as well. Already at the time of the communication, we had a public consultation that hinted at quite some problems in this space. And we're now at the moment investigating those further. Platforms, as was also said before, tend to be big if they are successful. They attract more users on either side, or on more sides if it's more than two-sided. So a successful platform is going to be influential, big, powerful, which is not a problem in its own right. And we've even seen situations where very big companies still disappeared after a while, so it's not cast in stone forever. But still, while this size exists, there is at least the potential of that power being not used in the most fair and responsible way, especially if there is a lot of small business users of the various platforms. And we're looking really into all types of platforms here. So we have been doing additional workshops. We commissioned another study with a survey built-in. We just got responses from more than 3,500 business users of all types of platforms. There will be further in-depth interviews and so on and so forth. Now, what has come out of our investigation so far pretty much confirms sort of the topics that already went into the communication of last year. We're still looking into issues of terms and conditions that may be very hard or harsh for a small business, let's say a small European SME that needs platforms to get to markets and virtually has no choice but to sign up to terms and conditions. When then things go wrong, there's always the claim that there's no proper redress, first not even probably complaint mechanism, but also no redress mechanism. So a lot of issues about the contractual relationships between the platforms and their business users, and we're looking very carefully into this. There are, of course, lots of concerns around transparency. A word that was probably already mentioned 50 times this afternoon. Transparency of all sorts. Now, again, either within the terms and conditions about pricing strategies, changes to fees, commissions, prices that happen very fast and not well announced. It's transparency in the field of search results. We had it as well. I think it was a colleague from BEUC that said, well, who knows exactly, or do we always know exactly, either as business or as consumers, what determines the search results out there? And a few other areas of transparency issues. There are issues around data, and not just the things we already heard before, privacy and data portability and so on, but also access to data, use of data in this ecosystem between platforms and business users. What sort of information has the platform? What do the business users obtain? And this, of course, this depends very much on the type of business and type of platform, but with a bit of imagination, you can certainly find some good examples yourself. So these are the sort of issues that come out much more clearly now, and we are still, as I said, finalizing all the fact-finding and analysis of that. We have not jumped to conclusions yet. That's the next phase, because we committed ourselves to publishing our findings by spring, and that will be done in the context of the DSM midterm review on the 10th of May, where we will then also say whether we think any solution or solutions may be needed to address those problems if we feel they are substantiated enough. The third and last aspect I want to mention is the responsibility liability work strand, which was also already mentioned here, because platforms are not only gatekeepers to markets, as we examine in the B2B exercise, but also to information, to content, what we see on the internet, what stays on the internet, what gets off the internet. There are lots of issues around this. We're working in two main directions here. The one is looking into the liability regime of the e-commerce directive, whether that still functions well, not least in the light of a lot of sectoral activities that have occurred in the meantime. There's a lot of content-specific work streams, whether it's a copyright reform or the AVMSD proposal, whether it's work in terrorism, on hate speech, on child pornography, what have you. So there is already a proliferation of sector-specific rules and obligations. If you add to that the appetite of a couple of member states to add a member state by member state dimension to this, that is not probably leading to an environment that is very predictable, legally clear, where compliance costs are so easy to control, where we can always be sure that illegal stuff gets down quickly, but also be equally sure that stuff that is not illegal stays online. What are the checks and balances that we do not ask my colleague here from Google to decide for us what we should and what we should not be seeing? So what checks and balances may be needed also in terms of democratic oversight? So that's an important work strand, as you can imagine, and very sensitive at that. And last but not least, the voluntary measures, so the idea of a Good Samaritan clause, which we're also asked to look into. We're also doing that because there is a perverse incentive in the e-commerce directive that may prevent platforms from taking responsible behavior in some instances, because they're arguing, well, if I do this, that, and the other, then you will use that against me and say, well, now you're no longer protected by the safe harbor because we have done certain things to monitor, for instance, content on our platform. So there are a couple of interesting, very challenging work strands we're working on right now. I think it's very important, by the way, as a last comment, that Europe takes the lead on this. I mean, we are talking about, anyway, a global phenomenon, but also about the digital single market. And we cannot afford that the digital single market, which is much more a single market than the old single market ever was, is put at risk by too much fragmentation and different solutions to the same problems. So with the help of member states, parliament and all stakeholders, we really hope that we get this not wrong, sorry. Oops.
Thank you so much, Mr. Steng, for that very clear final comment. We will try to help you not to get it wrong. And I think the first panel has been very helpful in outlining the main challenges. For sure, an economic area which is full of strong competition, an economic area that shakes a little bit the whole economy. And therefore, I think the best for the debate is that we step back a little bit from the different companies and systems and platforms in place to really check with a certain distance what this market looks like and what politicians can do to come to the result that I think we are all in agreement here together, to boost the European part, the European economy part of that game. The question is only what can we do to get there? And I'm extremely pleased that we have a lot of MEPs attending, Ruža Thun, our friend from Slovakia, Pascal Arimont, Henna Virkkunen, and Christian Karins, and Ansanda had to leave. That's what I see at the moment. And I have already some questions. So, Pascal, would you like to start?
Ja, vielen Dank, Andreas.
Yes, thank you very much, Andreas.
Vertreter der Kommission hat
The
gerade ein
Commission
Wort
representative
benutzt, was sehr
used
richtig
the
ist. Er
word
sprach
which was
von
very
der New Generation
appropriate.
of
He talked
Legislation.
about the new generation of
Und, das ist
legislation,
tatsächlich der Fall.
and that is
Wir
indeed
sind
the
dabei,
case.
ja, einen
We're in
legislativen
the
Rahmen zu schaffen,
process of creating a
der für
legislative
den
framework
Business, der sich da kreiert, und die
for the
Verbraucher gut
business
sein
that's
sollte, wie das
being
funktioniert.
created, and for the
Und die
consumers, and it should be good
Online-Welt
for
ist
both. And the
eine
online
sehr neue
world
Welt.
is a very new
Der
world.
Kollege Karinc hat es eben an seinem Beispiel
Colleague
sehr
Mr.
gut und anschaulich
Karinc
erklärt, wie wir selbst damit
set
umgehen,
this
wenn wir
out
selbst diese
in a
Welt
very
entdecken, wenn wir
clear
selbst
way,
online gehen und auf Plattformen
looking at
Dinge
how
konsumieren,
we
einkaufen und
consume
bestellen.
things, order
Eine
things, go
Welt, die
onto
sich gerade
platforms to
selbst
do this.
definiert,
It's
von
a
der,
world which is
oder eine Welt, bei der
self-defining.
auch einige misstrauisch sind. Und
And
das ist,
some
glaube ich,
people
auch
are a
das,
bit distrustful of this
das
world.
wesentliche Element, und das drückt sich
And
auch
I
an den
think the
Zahlen aus, die
essential
eben auch vom
element,
Panel
and this
hier
is expressed
gesagt
in the
worden sind. Zwei
figures
Zahlen
mentioned by
waren
the
da, glaube ich, sehr
panel.
interessant. Die
There were a
eine ist,
couple of
dass
very
nur
important
5% in
figures. Only
Frankreich Cross-Border E-Commerce machen.
5%
Also ich
of
habe die
people,
europäische
businesses
Zahl,
in
das sind
France do
12%.
cross-border
Und die
e-commerce. I
zweite
think
Zahl
the
ist, dass nur
overall
4% der
figure is
Online-Plattformen,
12%, and
die
then only
grenzüberschreitendes Business
4% of
machen,
online
europäisch sind.
platforms
Die eine Hälfte
doing
ist amerikanisch und die andere Hälfte Plattformen
cross-border
ist nicht grenzüberschreitend.
business
Das ist
are
eigentlich ein Zeugnis, was
European.
sehr schlecht ist im Moment und
The
was
other
besser
ones are
gemacht werden
American
muss, damit
or
dieser
else
Digital Single Market
working in
funktionieren
the
kann.
domestic
Und dabei ist
market.
ein Wort, glaube
So I
ich,
think that's a
entscheidend.
sign of how things could
Ich habe
work
eben von
better. And I
Misstrauen
think,
gesprochen,
well, I was just talking
dass
about
es nicht
lack of
funktioniert. Und deswegen ist
trust
das Kernelement,
and
dass sowohl der Verbraucher,
concerns that things
aber
aren't
auch
working,
die
and
Leute,
that's
die in
something
diesen Business
important for the
einsteigen,
consumer, but also
Vertrauen
people
haben in diesem
going into
Businessmodell, das sich
business.
gerade da
The
bildet.
idea is that
Und
trust should be
deswegen
created in this
müssen
business
wir
model.
oder kann man zwei Ansätze verfolgen,
So there
wenn
are
man
two
den
possible
Rechtsrahmen zurzeit
approaches
definiert, und er wird gerade definiert
when you're defining
für die
the
Online-Welt.
legal framework for
Der
the
erste
online
Ansatz ist,
world.
wir
The
lassen
first
eigentlich jeden
approach
Mitgliedstaat weiterhin
is
bestimmen, was
we
er möchte.
let the member state decide what
Das
they want.
ist der eine Ansatz. Der
That's
zweite
one
Ansatz wäre,
approach. The second
harmonisieren die
approach is
wichtigsten
to
Elemente
harmonize
in diesem
the most
Rechtsrahmen.
important
Und das
elements in
sind
this
dann
legal
Dinge wie
framework.
Verbraucherschutz,
Consumer
Mehrwertsteuerabwicklung oder auch
protection,
Datenschutz
treatment
bzw.
of VAT, data
Datenweiterverarbeitung.
protection, data
Beim
processing
ersten
are all
Ansatz,
key
in
issues.
meiner Meinung oder meiner Meinung nach,
My view is
wenn wir
that with regard to
jeden
the first
Mitgliedstaat
approach,
eigentlich
if
definieren
we
lassen, was er
leave it up
möchte,
to each member state
dann
to
überleben
define what they
nur
would
die
like,
Großen,
only the big
beziehungsweise
players would
das,
survive.
was wir eigentlich machen müssten, übernehmen deren Legal Departments.
And
Die
their
können mit
legal
diesen verschiedenen
departments
Gesetzgebungen
would be
klarkommen. Ich
able
meine,
to cope
die
with all the
Zalandos
different
und
legislation.
Googles und andere Plattformen in der Größe zeigen es,
Google
dass sie
and other
das können. Sie bestehen ja
platforms
schon, sie haben fast
they already
monopolartige
exist, they
Stellungen.
almost have
Und
a monopolistic
dementsprechend
position,
werden sie das auch ohne europäische Gesetzgebung weiterhin
and they'll
machen
be
und
able to
überleben und gut
continue to
machen. Der
survive and do
zweite
well
Ansatz
without European
wir harmonisieren
legislation.
diese
The second approach
Kernelemente,
is to harmonize
und
the
das
core
bedeutet, dass
elements,
dass wir ein sogenanntes Level Playing Field
and that
schaffen,
means
das
creating a
Vertrauen
level
schafft und das
playing
auf dem
field which
Zwei-Mann-Betrieb
creates
wahrscheinlich
trust,
die
and this
Gelegenheit
means
gibt,
that a
auf
two-man
oder mit gleichen,
business
unter gleichen Bedingungen
has an opportunity
Business-Ideen zu kreieren. Das
create
heißt,
business ideas
dass wir
under
da
the same
wirklich an die
conditions as
Substanz
the
gehen und
other
diesen Markt
players.
auch schaffen.
And that really means
Und meiner
getting into the
Meinung nach
substance and
kann
actually
eigentlich
creating
nur
a
der zweite
market.
Ansatz zum
And in my
Erfolg
view,
führen, ein
I think
harmonisierter Ansatz,
only the
in dem wir
harmonized
selbst
approach
bestimmen,
will
wie wir
lead
das
us
gerne
to
hätten.
success.
Und dementsprechend habe ich da
we
eine Frage
can
an die
define
BEUC
this, and
direkt
I have a question
als
directly to
Vertreter
the
der
big
Verbraucherschützer. Wie
representative
schaffen wir es,
representing
den
the
Verbraucherschutz
consumer protection side?
zu
How do we
harmonisieren,
create
ohne
this?
dabei den
How do we
Markt
harmonize
beziehungsweise
consumer
Marktchancen
protection
mit zu viel Schutz regelrecht zu ersticken? Wo ist
without
das gute
stifling
Niveau?
the market with
Und
too
auch eine
much
Frage an die Vertreterin
regulation?
von Spotify.
How can we do that? And
Vielleicht so
then
als
to
Best
the
Practice.
Spotify
Spotify ist eines
representative.
der Unternehmen, die es in Europa geschafft haben.
Spotify
die
is
in
one of the companies that's
Europa
made it
marktführend
in
sind.
Europe.
Was war
It's
für
a
Sie das
European
Kernelement,
market
das
leader.
wichtigste
What's the
Element, um es
core
von einem
element
kleinen
for you?
Start-up
What's the
bis
key
hin zu einem
element
europäischen
to
Marktführer zu
move
schaffen?
from a
Was
small
ist da
startup
wichtig
to
und was
a
ist
European market
für Sie
leader? What's
das
the important thing
Element, was in
there?
Europa
And
wirklich
what's the
noch geändert werden
element
muss und sehr
which
schnell,
does
damit es
need to be
funktioniert?
changed
Vielen Dank.
quickly in
Thank you,
Europe?
Pascal. Next one is Henna Virkkonen.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I want to thank all our experts for your presentations. It was very interesting to hear a little bit different angles for this topic. I have a short question. I think it's maybe the answer is maybe larger one, who wants to answer. Because here, as the decision makers, for us, one of the most important principles has been that we should have same kind of rules in online world and in offline world. So how you think that is it possible to make that kind of general rules which are working in the online world and in offline world? Of course, we know that nowadays the offline world, it means that it has been created new business models which didn't exist before. But anyway, there should be, you know, some same kind of rules anyway. And then when we think about the competitiveness of European markets, we should be very careful that we are not over-regulating our businesses, as was mentioned already in the keynote speak and in the opening words. So how much you think that we can go forward with the self-regulation of platforms? Because as we know, in the old media world, for example, the media is self-regulating itself quite much. We are not regulating as politicians the content of media very much. So the media and journalists, they are taking care with their own ethical rules also, that what kind of content they are publishing, for example. So can you see that we can go forward also with the self-regulation, that the platforms are also taking more responsibility themselves? Like I can see that some of them are now trying to do, and they are taking very promising steps also forward in this direction. Or is there some clear areas where we need new rules and new regulation also in European level?
Thank you so much, Henna. And before giving the floor back to our speakers, I would like to ask also two short questions. My first question would go to John. You have been so positive about the people that you are training in Europe on digital skills. So my question, do you train the wrong people? Should you start with the European Commission? Because last week, no, it's not only the European Commission, last week there was a hearing in a German court about hate speech and Facebook, and the judges said, yeah, but fairly speaking, we all have no Facebook accounts, so we don't really know how this works. So my question, which is a little bit a funny question, do you train the wrong people? And the background to this is, why is, from your point of view, Europe underperforming? Because I think it's, I don't know, but I think it's other reasons. And to Werner Stenk, following on what Henna has said, I mean, if you follow the idea that the European market is so broad and there are so many activities nowadays performed via platforms, and if you don't see that much of a need to come up with further regulation, would you then say that we just have to enforce faster and better existing laws that are already there? Thank you very much. And I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Augustine, because the first question has been to you, I think.
Yes, Ms. Arimon, on your third question related to how to ensure it's a balanced approach, the answer here is found actually in the treaty, subsidiarity. So what we can achieve at EU level and what we should achieve at EU level, that member states should not regulate or intervene to prevent fragmentation. A good example of this was the Consumer Rights Directive, with Mr. Schwab was the rapporteur at the time, which is looking at what elements do we need to fully harmonize in the EU because they are relevant and essential for e-commerce, and what are the elements that actually needs to be left for the member states because of the particularities of the national markets. One of the areas that has been harmonized the most in the EU is consumer law. We started with the Product Safety Directive, then the Unfair Contract Terms Directive, and so on. But nobody imagined at the time of the adoption of the Contract Terms Directive that in the future we will to fully harmonize the rights of withdrawal or the information requirements. So it's a step, it's an evolution that actually has been very positive for both consumers and businesses. Now, of course, we're going to face the challenges, particularly for you, with the tangible goods proposal or the digital content proposal as well. The situation is a little bit different because on the tangible goods we have quite developed national laws. Consumers do not want to lose out, and companies want to have a common set of rules. So again, that will depend on the compromise that they will be achieved. But based on the experiences with the Consumer Rights Directive, that compromise can be achieved. But then we have really to look at what are the areas that really needs or worth fully harmonizing, and those that have to be kept under minimum harmonization. Then, if I can just quickly react to the question on self-regulation. Well, we don't have to forget that self-regulation we have very little experience at EU level. There are some good national experiences in several member states, but at EU level, we are not that advanced. Something that could perhaps worth exploring is the idea of co-regulation. We need to have principles that then are going to be implemented. And this goes, for example, on the line of what Marine was saying. Of course, we don't pretend that the enforcers have to go after every single company. The most effective enforcement is the self-enforcement, is when a company already complies. If self-regulation and co-regulation can help for that, they're welcome, but we really have to look at how to make it work at EU level. Thank you.
Perfect. Marine?
So, thank you very much for your question. First thing, I would like to mention, because I see some colleagues from others really successful European companies here. Spotify is a proud member of the European Tech Alliance. We have King in the room, and I think that there is many areas where Europe is leading. And I think, I would say, I won't go into the regulatory challenge, but I would just say about the mindset. I think that was what is behind Spotify's success is ambition. And it was ambition and the ability to say, okay, we come from this tiny country, but we're gonna succeed, and we're not gonna be constrained in our market. When we launched, we were in 6 different markets at the same time in Europe. We launched simultaneously, and we always had in mind that to succeed, Google knows that to succeed they have to come to Europe. We knew that to succeed we had to go to the US. And especially when you operate in the music industry, what is the biggest market today? It's the American market. And we have been ambitious from the very beginning. We have tried to not have border, to give the similar access to everyone in Europe, to give, we have a catalog that is the same across Europe. That's one of the key things. That's one of the key reasons of the success. But we have adapted locally to make sure that, and it's a basic thing, but it was, I think, the main reason why Spotify succeeds is ambition, being able to have the same service everywhere, but to tailor it to the local needs, and to make sure that we understand the law, that we play fair. And I think that also makes us win the heart of the music industry as well. So, I believe it's the reason for the success. But second thing, and I will go to your question, Ms. Virkunen. The success is never guaranteed, and the success should be, we should think about success. We don't want to be the next MySpace. We want to have the ability to make sure we always grow, we always maintain our leadership on fair terms. You're talking about self-regulation, and I understand, I understand the problem of over-regulating and how it could be problematic. And the Commission, the European Commission, was really pretty clear on that. A one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to platform is not the solution, and I don't believe it's the solution because there is many types of different platforms. But I think we have clearly identified a way where we see the need of targeted intervention and targeted regulation. In the problems, the problem I've talked about, I don't think, and that's why I think it was really important, and I mentioned the fact that it's not a new problem. It's a problem we have seen in the past, and it's the problem that has been it's a pattern, it's a systemic pattern. And I would love to see self-regulation, but for the moment, I've never seen in this area of when you own the access to consumer, what prevents you to be a gatekeeper, and that's where we need regulation to make sure that we don't stifle innovation and promote consumer choice. It hasn't been the case in the past. Let's see what's going to be for the future. But I'm very.
Thank you, Marine. John.
So maybe I'll just quickly pick up on the point on self-regulation. I mentioned in my presentation that we do think that the internet has in part grown and been so quickly to grow, and the online online services and products have grown and proliferated and innovated so much because of the flexibility of self and co-regulation. I mean, the entire internet infrastructure is managed by non-governmental organizations, and that has been hugely successful. And the reason why that has in part been so successful is because these are systems that have been designed to scale. And technologists love scale. I mean, Google is we love scale because scale allows you efficiency, it allows you to reach many markets and many consumers. And so I think that we've seen many examples on, I mentioned around hate speech, around transparency requirements and free expression, around the online advertising industry, where self and co-regulation has been very successful and very adaptable. And I think the final point on that I would make is that we believe also that following the better regulation principles as set out by this Commission is a successful approach. So looking at where the existing regulation is, where it may or may not be solving the problems that have been identified, and then starting with self and co-regulation first before we move to government regulation. The second point I would make is to your question around our experience with politicians and with regulators and those interested in the online economy is that they're keen to learn more and they ask very good questions, and we find a very productive dialogue on those issues. But on the question around why do you think Europe is underperforming, I mean, I would first of all say, I think that we have a habit in Europe of unfortunately pointing to the negative statistics. We look at the reasons why Europe isn't doing well enough, rather than the examples where Europe is doing really great. And that, whether that's raising capital, whether that's the world-beating startups that are in the room here and are a huge part of the European ecosystem. But then I would go back to also, and I do a lot of work as part of my role at Google of working with entrepreneurs through our campus network and our Google for Entrepreneurs network. And the European entrepreneurs I meet have no lack of ambition. They go global from the start. They want to be building world-beating companies. And when they do look to the US for finance, which of course does sometimes happen, I think that we make a mistake to say that they go there because they have to or because the money is there. They go there because there's 350 million consumers under, for the most part, a single regulatory regime. And that's what Europe needs, and the digital single market strategy is all about, is how do you create a single regime for 500 million consumers. And I think the more that we focus on that agenda and the harmonization agenda, the more and more we'll be able to grow this European ecosystem even more. Thank you.
Thank.
3 points to address some of the questions. First, Mrs. Virkkunen, should there be the same rules for online and offline world? I would argue that this might function rather seldomly, actually. So to have the same rules, that they make the same sense in both circumstances, that may work in some cases. Let's say, for instance, taxation, that things should be taxed. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah, if a taxi is taxed, then also the Uber driver should be taxed. I think there's not much controversy around that. But very often you would rather look into the public policy objectives that are behind a certain piece of legislation, because that's the ultimate purpose. You have law because you want to achieve something with this. Yeah? You want to protect the consumer, you want to protect the worker, whatever it is. And there may be now an online business model that does not quite function like the offline model, so you would not use exactly the same rule to protect the consumer. It may not work, or maybe too much. Practical example where even online is treated, and for a good reason, differently than offline. If you go into a shop and buy something, you have no right for withdrawal. But if you buy online, you have those 14 days, because the acknowledgement is, well, you don't see it, you don't touch it, you don't smell it, so you have to open it at home. And so therefore, you are allowed to give it back. Other examples are even in the recent AVMSD proposal, for instance, where it was about protecting, for instance, children from watching harmful content. And now, TV companies always had to respect that, but they had editorial control. They decided when a certain film with certain content was aired, and then there were rules when they should not be done. Now saying that YouTube now also has content is of course true, so therefore the underlying need to protect maybe there as well. How can we make sure that children don't see harmful content on YouTube? But since YouTube doesn't have editorial control, you must find other ways of doing that. And that's, I think, what the proposal does. So my answer is it's very difficult. Very quickly on enforcement. Of course, that was your question, actually. Of course, it's always our first instinct that implementation and enforcement of what is there should be exhausted before you dream up new rules. But while enforcing, you may actually find out that certain rules cannot be enforced, because they were designed for a different purpose in a different world. So while enforcement is the first answer to many problems, it may also show that it no longer works. And actually, when I did a workshop with startups in Hamburg a few years back, there were some crowdfunding startups there, very successful, and they told me, well, we went into that space because it was not regulated, and we were testing and trying and doing certain things, but when we became more important, more successful, the banks woke up, the regulators woke up, so therefore you couldn't have enforced anything at the time because they were not covered by any legislation. But now in terms of policy response, once you see, well, those crowdfunding systems create risks for consumers, you would probably not put all the banking acquis on them and say, well, now as from now you're a bank, good luck. Yeah? So therefore you may find alternative solutions. Last remark, legislation versus market-driven solutions, which is a bit a red line here as well. We should not forget it's not necessarily a dichotomy. Often you would need legislation to make markets function properly. So it's not that if you can't say I'm super liberal, I will never intervene in markets, but if, for instance, market size, market dominance, or information asymmetries are so important, then competition will be endangered as well, and markets need to be protected through legislation. That's just the last remark.
Excellent. Thank you so much for these short and sharp answers. There are plenty of other issues that we wanted to discuss as well in the first round, but that has now to be happening in the second round, and therefore we will stop this first panel here. Thank you so much for the participation to all of you.
So, dear audience, are we ready to continue? Thank you for Andreas for hosting and chairing the first panel, and now we have our second panel session. And like it was said in the beginning, we are drafting an initiative report in the Parliament now on online platforms and on digital economy, and I'm doing that with my co-rapporteur Philippe Chauvin, who can't be represented here today, but he is doing the IMCO committee part, and I'm from the ITRE committee, and we are working with the joint report on online platforms and digital economy, and this hearing is part of that work. So thank you for everyone for participating in this. And we have 4 more experts here, and we have 1 hour left. Our first speaker will be Samuel Laurinkari. He heads up eBay's work on European Union policies impacting eBay and its users. And as we know, eBay is a forerunner of e-commerce and online sales. And Samuel Laurinkari will talk especially about the benefits of of the online platforms and about boosting the growth of digital economy. So please, Samuel, and we have tried to keep all the speeches in 7 minutes, so very, short presentations and then discussion after that.
Thank you very much. I'll try to stick to the 7 minutes. So first of all, thank you very much for inviting us to participate in this important discussion and to contribute to the Finnish dominance on this panel. Now, I would like to start with basically giving my colleague from PayPal 2 options, either to give me that clicker or to do the clicking on my behalf. Thank you very much. She chose the first option. And I think the slide deck is on. So I think I'll start with spending 1 minute on introducing eBay, the online commerce company that basically invented online commerce 21 years ago. Many of you will remember eBay and recall it as a sort of an online flea market of the 90s. But especially people that live in countries or markets where we don't have a country platform today still remember it as a flea market, as a place where you'd sell stuff that you didn't actually want for Christmas in January. But we're quite strongly involved from a C2C marketplace into a business-to-consumer marketplace. So nowadays, 80% of our business comes from predominantly small businesses leveraging our platform to reach a customer base beyond their region, beyond their country, beyond their continent, and actually be global from the day they start trading on our platform. So that's the story I would like to tell today, and the story is the people that empower and fill our shelves, because eBay is a platform, right? So we don't sell anything, we don't have warehouses, we don't have logistics. We are a company that invests in technology that connects buyers and sellers globally. So our only and mere function and a mission is to make the transaction between buyers and sellers as easy as possible and to enable that. So the people that trade on our platform, these small businesses, they look like these people on this slide. There are hundreds of thousands of them in Europe only, but I put 8 of them on this slide because these people have been coming to Brussels and meeting policymakers and telling the story about how it is to be a European small business that tries to embrace the opportunities of the digital single market. I very shortly tell the story of the lady on the second to the right, Andrea, who together with her husband used to own a textile company in Baden-Württemberg in Germany that is known for, or was known for, its textile industry. So the company made women's garments, but however, at the time when production shifted to lower cost economies, they went out of business. So they were left with basically leftover inventory of the women's garment business that they had to get rid of, and they decided to sell it on eBay. Turned out there was huge global demand for high-quality German wool, and they basically built a new business around that, the sort of ruins of the old business. So nowadays they employ 40 people, and they export worldwide. And that's just an example of a story, or a story is an example of the way that technology has fundamentally challenged or changed the nature of global commerce. So back in the days, the only way a small business or consumer would participate in international commerce would be to tap into the supply chain of a multinational company, because you simply couldn't reach a global market. But technology has overcome, or has helped these small businesses overcome these issues and allowed them to truly participate in international commerce, quite often enabled by online marketplaces or online platforms such as ours. To give you an idea of what kind of figures we see when we study the small business community that trade on our platform, is that basically all of them export. So 93% of the small businesses that use our platform are engaged in exports. They, in average, reach 18 different markets. 40% of them serve more than 4 continents. So these are really the micro multinational companies that we have seen evolving with the evolvement of technology. To give you an example of what kind of innovation it is that small businesses need in order to succeed, and what kind of technology it is that we help them with, is mobile commerce. So a few years back, this idea that someone would buy something on a mobile device was still a little bit silly. But nowadays, more than 50% of all purchases on our sites have a mobile touch point. And it's very convenient to use an app to buy something online, but you will not have millions of apps on your phone. You may have 2 or 3 or 4 shopping apps on your phone that you can use to compare. So it's important for these small businesses, in order to be there where people are, i.e. in your pocket, they need to be on an online marketplace where they can be found. Actually, an interesting sort of fun fact is that the most expensive item that was sold on eBay last year was a yacht that was worth, I think, $19 million. And that was bought on a mobile device. So people don't care anymore. People don't use desktop necessarily to conduct their purchases. A couple of further examples of the kind of supporting services that we provide to small businesses is obviously they need traffic. I mean, you may have a website, but it's all good and great unless you have traffic on it, and which converts into purchases. So on a large online marketplace as ours, you'll have a lot of traffic, a huge global customer base. We invest in technology. We spend in marketing and advertising to draw that traffic in. We provide certain supporting services, for example, cooperation with shipping companies. We provide access to data they need to understand how their business works, understand consumer patterns, understand consumer behavior. We allow merchants to tailor their listings or their eBay shops. We allow them to price, obviously, the products that they're selling at any price point they would like to. And as well, we reward merchants that create a good or a great customer experience by ranking them higher up in the search results. So this is just a screenshot of our seller hub. If you are an eBay seller, if you're a small business owner that uses eBay to sell, you'll have access to a seller hub page that provides you with all the information you need to be even better in doing your business. So what this means for policy-making purposes. One, platforms are hugely important for the economy and society. This is just an example of the online commerce environment, or vertical, you could even say. Platforms, the economy is arguably, to some extent, platformized, or the internet is, and platforms in a variety of verticals of life are enabling users, consumers, and small businesses and big businesses to enable them to embrace the digital opportunities. So in our view, what that means is that policymakers, when they look at platform policy, they need to ensure 2 things. One is to maintain platforms' innovation capacity. Don't do anything that is extremely harmful for platforms, because that will, in the end, only have an impact on the enabling force that these platforms have, so i.e. on the users that are enabled through the platforms. Just a mention of an extremely bad policy initiative that is recently, or at the moment being discussed also in this House, is the EU copyright proposal that takes away the legal foundation of the internet. A platform such as ours can only exist because we are a platform and we're not a contracting entity in any transaction on our site, which also means that we cannot assume responsibility and liability for the products that are being traded. Sure, we do everything in our power to make sure that our platform is safe and consumers can trust our platform, but we will not be able to accept legal liability for the products that are being traded on our site. But that is exactly what the copyright proposal is aiming to do, and that goes way beyond the music sector or the audiovisual sector, but it really impacts the entire internet economy. And we look forward to participating in constructive debates on how to make that better. And last point, ensuring fair access to platforms. The biggest barrier that our sellers are facing in terms of access to platforms is that their suppliers are actually telling them not to sell online or not to sell on online marketplaces. So contractual barriers to online commerce are the biggest pain point that prevents small businesses from participating. It's very difficult, if you're a small business, very difficult to be enabled to embrace the opportunities of the digital single market if your suppliers tell you not to sell online or to sell on online marketplaces. I think I went a little bit over time. I apologize for that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. It was very, of course, encouraging for us to hear that we have also success stories in Europe in online platform economy. And now we are going to next example of that. The next speaker is Peter Lochbieler from Booking.com, and as we know, Booking.com is a great example also of a European online platform that has been able to grow from a small startup to a big global player. And Peter will tell us how the European platforms can succeed and how to create a level playing field for companies to accelerate the growth. So, please, Peter.
Thank you, Hannah. Good afternoon, and thanks for inviting me to speak to you today here. There are four things, basically, I'd like to speak about, and that is to start with the regulatory patchwork that we currently perceive in Europe. That is, secondly, indeed sharing a few success factors of how Booking.com managed to grow from a small startup to a market leader worldwide. That is then talking briefly about the benefits of platforms and of digitalization generally speaking. And lastly, a few considerations of what we believe a platform-friendly environment would look like in Europe. So to start by pouring some water into the wine, speaking of fragmentation and regulatory patchwork, and often when speaking about the DSM, we get questions, why don't we have more European Amazons and Googles and eBays for that matter? And we all know, and I will be very brief on that, there are cultural reasons, there are economic reasons for the success of the US in the new economy in particular, the size of the market, having one set of rules for 320 million consumers, but also the entrepreneurial spirit prone to risk-taking, which is simply, I would say, still today stronger in the US than this side of the Atlantic. But I think we will all also agree that we are catching up in Europe and that we are making good progress, speaking of developing startup ecosystems, for example. And indeed, it's one of the most important contributions that companies such as Booking.com can make to serve as role models and also engage in such local and national platforms. In the past, the US was also much better, no doubt, in providing venture capital and growth financing, and they still are, but again, we're making progress. But taking the history of Booking.com here as an example, we are a European company by all measures, I would say. We have been founded in the Netherlands, we're headquartered in Amsterdam. 2/3 of our 13,000 people worldwide are based in Europe. We pay our corporate tax here. However, a little more than 10 years ago, we came to a point where we needed to finance the next phase of growth, and we simply at that point, 2004, 2005, could not find the right growth financing in Europe. So what happened, the US Priceline Group stepped up and bought Booking.com for what is perceived from today as an incredible bargain for $135 million US dollars. So that is just one example. I think it could look different today because the environment looks better, but back then that was the right decision because this financing then also has helped us from the still fairly small scale business that we were back then to becoming the market leader in online accommodation. But despite progress made, I'm still worried that there are still significant barriers to growth, namely regulatory fragmentation in Europe, where US-based companies simply can scale faster. Scaling has been mentioned a few times this afternoon already, and it is an absolute key aspect, because as a result of this, American startups can gain market share faster and can ultimately buy out the European competitors at an early growth stage. So the lack of a single market, and in particular of a digital single market, I believe is one of the reasons why the majority of European tech startups do not manage to expand beyond national boundaries or indeed decide to move to the US at an early stage. We are one of these stories, one of the examples that have managed to cross that point. And yet, even at our size, our biggest concern today with regard to regulation in Europe is still the fragmentation that we perceive and a contradiction between the high-level commitments to the DSM that we, I'm sure, all support in this room, and at the same time decisions at national level that clearly undermine the DSM aspirations. In our sector, online accommodation, we currently see the DSM undermined by a few developments. that is inconsistent implementation of EU competition law, where we have one very clear set of EU law. However, it is implemented by different competition authorities in entirely opposing ways. This clearly does not help to continue to scale fast in Europe, and we sometimes feel a little bit like a guinea pig of cooperation between competition authorities, but coordination that we feel has actually failed in this example. And it's then secondly, national legislation coming in that also clearly undermines the digital single market for services in particular, and national legislation that often has interventionist and protectionist tendencies, rather trying to save the good old known versus the unknown, and the unknown coming with some uncertainties. None of these issues by itself would be a deal breaker, but the combination of such lack of coherence distracts, it adds complexity to doing business in Europe, and it slows down. And it does so for Booking, but it will do so even more so for the startups that Booking was 15 or 20 years ago. And when talking of a level playing field, we clearly have to think in global dimensions, not restrict our approach to Europe only. Booking, as I said, is one of the examples that made it, and by revenue, market capitalization, and employee count, we are one of the world's largest and most internationally diverse e-commerce company today, with 190 offices across 70 countries in the world. And I said already 2/3 of our global employees are based in Europe. We represent more than 100 nationalities in Amsterdam alone at headquarters. And I'm also proud to say that close to 60% of our global staff are women, and 90% are younger than 40 years, actually. We've hired about 4,500 people in 2016 alone, and currently have 583 open positions, as I just checked a few days ago on our website. Sharing a few ideas what made Booking succeed. It's always difficult with hindsight, and it's 3 very simple points at the end of the day. We put the customer at the center of everything we do, and I think the same goes for almost any e-commerce company that has had success. The success is built on 20 years of continuously improving the customer experience, sometimes in bigger steps, but mostly in small, incremental, evolutionary steps of innovation. Secondly, the company was built for cross-border scaling from day one, and that might be something in common with a lot of European startups that actually come from smaller member states, because they are forced almost by nature to scale from the very beginning. And thirdly, we kept things simple and focused. Short comment, you would not have seen a Booking representative on a panel like this here today. And don't get me wrong, with all respect to members of parliament, I would urge you, don't expect startups to come and see you. They have more important things to do, with all respect again. We can now afford, Booking can afford to have someone like me sit here and dedicate 100% of my time to government relations, but I started 1 year ago. I was the first employee dealing with public affairs. In the 19 years before of Booking, we stayed out of it and focused on the company growth. Briefly about the benefits of platforms. We've covered it. I don't think they can be overestimated, and importantly for both consumers and existing traditional industries. Speaking of consumers, we provide them with increased transparency. We help to bring prices down. We provide choice, value for money. We have 113 million verified reviews of guests who actually stayed in these hotels, because that's the only way of leaving a review on Booking. We have over 1 million properties worldwide on our site, and we do about 1.2 billion room night bookings every day on average. That means around about 150,000 bookings during the time we're sitting here together in the hearing. To hotels and other types of accommodation, we are a technology partner, and I really want to emphasize the word partner here, especially to the smaller independent hotels. We are their gateway to the digital transformation. We help them to capitalize on the internet opportunity, and we enable them to market themselves on a global scale in a way that a small hotel would never ever be able to do. Just think of the small Finnish bed and breakfast attracting Chinese, Indian tourists. That would just not work without the scale effects of a global platform. And all that is at zero risk because we only get paid a commission by hotel partners after we have brought them additional guests. As such, we are a two-sided platform, and I believe this is also a built-in system of checks and balances, because only if we keep the end consumer happy and at the same time provide added value to accommodation partners, only then will we ever be successful. If we try to maximize it one way or the other, the system will get an imbalance and we will not succeed. Now, what does this mean? Last slide. For the discussion we're having on finding the right regulatory and legislative approach to platforms. In order to allow startups to easily and quickly scale across Europe, we have to harmonize relevant laws, but also equally important, we have to enforce them very consistently across Europe. This is where we believe that there is a gap, really, the strict and clear enforcement of rules. We believe, broadly speaking, that existing legislation in the area of consumer protection, competition, data protection is, again, broadly speaking, fit for purpose. It should be adapted and complemented where a problem is identified. But let's give new business ideas, including platforms, room to breathe. Let's not suffocate them at an early stage with too much, maybe well-intended, but too much regulation. Let's also help traditional industries to be fit for the digital age and to build on the opportunities that platforms bring to them. But let's use regulation to address real problems rather than in anticipation of problems that may or may not materialize in the future. And that is my final call on the European Commission strongly, not to shy away from showing its teeth as guardian of the treaties and of the single market in particular. My appeal to member states is not to let short-term domestic interests override the huge long-term benefits that platforms can provide and that the single market can provide. And my hope for the European Parliament, last but not least, is to help the Commission defend and complete the single market and the digital single market in particular because of the benefits it brings to all. I'm tempted, but maybe we leave that for the Q&A to respond to some points that were made before, specifically to booking, but I leave that to the members present, whether that has their interest, and also in the interest time, I think I'm up with my time. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Peter. And after these two presentations, I really have the feeling that yes, we can succeed also in Europe. So the word trust was mentioned several times already during this afternoon, and our next speaker is Pia Sorvillo, Director of the Government Relations Team, Head of PayPal European Affairs Team in Brussels. And we know that payments, they are a crucial part of online business and they need to be safe and secure. Pia Sorvillo will tell us more about the digital payments and the regulatory framework on digital payments in the European Union. And hopefully we also get useful tips how to increase users' trust in the digital world. So please, Pia.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be relevant and try to have a presentation that actually will be potentially informative and to the point of online platforms and commerce. We actually see payments as being the oil between the wheels of commerce. So as PayPal, we feel that actually we are the bridge between you as users and the people that are on this panel and are the platforms enablers. Before I get to my presentation, I would like just to make a very short comments because I've been feeling that there is a lot of scrutiny on US companies PayPal is obviously a US company, just like eBay. We used to be part of the same family. But just one comment, and it's not defensive, it's really made in good faith. Don't you think that we are living in a global dimension when we refer to digital? I think that's really the case. In our experience, in terms of cross-border transaction, we increasingly have people that are buying from Europe to China and US. And this is also the reason why every time I speak with regulators, especially on payments issues, I recommend that every type of standards is set having also in consideration what's happening at international, global level. And then a second point I want to just give you for food for thoughts. It's true we're coming from US, but we come in Europe to create jobs, opportunities, and also to enable what I say in my title here, enable commerce and empowering consumers. I will give you more details on this. So the way I'd like to start is to, if this works. Oops. Okay. So I really try to stick to 7 minutes, but if I can't, I tend to be very passionate about what we do because I really trust that we are making the difference. So feel free to stop me if I go too much over time. Let me start with a short presentation about PayPal. It's a success story, luckily, and we are continue investing. We are continue to find opportunities that are helping us to help platforms and to help consumers. Again, we have this aim, this ambition to be the bridge that actually is enabling platforms to be successful and helping consumers to pay online in a way that they feel protected. And they pay online, they feel that they feel more comfortable. Because payments, that's a very important concept. Payment is very much related to culture. The way we pay is an everyday exercise that we do is related very closely the way we always used to do it. So it's very close to culture. So despite all the harmonization that we had at the European level, actually the way that consumers pay in Finland or in Italy is totally different. I think this is something that we learned very well. So a few figures here. I think what is very important for us, this is for the last result, is the increase on the mobile transaction. And another data that I should have put is actually the increase on the cross-border transaction that we have, which is actually much larger than in US. So the average cross-border transactions in US for PayPal is 30%, around 30%. Actually, last year in Europe was almost 50%. We were around 47%, growing from the last year. So there is some momentum around people willing to shop cross-border, which is a huge success because it is exactly cross-border where you find actually the attempt from consumers to, well, the consideration that, well, should I do this? Is that safe? Is that secure? And perhaps that's the reason why we've been particularly successful. Going into more in detail what we do for our consumers, this is really our mantra, enabling people. You might have seen, I hope that there are some PayPal consumers here, or users actually, as we call it. You might have seen this around in advertising. We believe in a concept of new money. What does it mean, new money? It means that actually you can pay the way you want, using your mobile, using your desktop, and especially in the way that you feel more protected. We tend to believe that especially in the digital world, the remoteness of the interaction actually needs consumers to feel even more trusted, even more protected. And the way we do this is actually by providing some specific support. First of all, thanks to the fact that PayPal is a very trust brand, actually, last year we scored on the 5th on the rank of the most trusted brands worldwide. Is in US awards. They love to do these things, but actually it was the first time that we were on this ranking, and this is the result of the way that we have been investing with I will say with merchants, and also thanks to the trust of our consumers. Trust is something that you gain. And the reason why we are particular trust is because we try to provide a service that actually is convenient. It's very easy to use. But what you see is just the first layer. So behind the convenience that we offer, there are technology in which we invest heavily. So when you buy online, your one click actually hinders a lot of interaction that you don't see, and we actually are able to track the transaction very closely because we are part of this. We have this specific closed loop system. Thanks to this closed loop system, which is proprietary to PayPal, we are able to trace the transaction from A to Z. So actually, you are paying in a very secure environment. Consumers are not necessarily aware of this, so we are also trying to provide additional guarantee. Additional guarantee is typically the buyer protection program, which actually we improved thanks to something that we learned in Europe. So that's the point where actually US is investing in Europe to try to meet the need of European consumers. Something that I should have said is actually we try to be closer to our consumers and to our partners, meaning the merchants, by constantly receiving input from them. We do on a regular basis, on a bi-quarterly basis, surveys of the market, partnering with Ipsos, which is a survey agency. And we've been also sharing some of this information with policymakers. So what we learned from users is something very simple. The majority of people were not shopping online because they felt, okay, what about if I buy something, is it not quite what I wanted, and I don't like it? Should I pay the shipping cost to return the goods? So several people were just, reluctant to go and shop online. And we decided, you know what? Let's remove this pain point. And that's what I've been doing. So if you pay with PayPal for the type of goods that are covered with this guarantee, actually we pay you the cost for shipping back the goods that you don't like. And again, this has been a fantastic tool to give an incentive to people that actually are still afraid of the digital interaction. I cannot call the merchant. Who should I call? I don't like the goods. Should I send it back? This is removed. And this is something actually that we launched in France. So I think it's a success story that tells you that how US companies are also very sensitive to the input that we have from Europe. And this is actually a program that's been launched in France, by now is rolled out across the 28 member states. Going next to what we do to support our merchant. This is a slide that actually summarizes the way we see the trends into in the global commerce, in the digital commerce. From one side, you have the surge of mobile commerce, and on the other side, at the bottom of the slide, at the same time, you have cyber threats. All the discussion around security of payments, some of you might be aware of this, how we breach this, how PayPal is able to help, especially merchants in that context, how we can help merchants to be more effective, enabling them to use PayPal as a trust brand to have more consumers that are buying with them. I will say, first of all, because we are agnostic in terms of the system of payment and in terms of technology. So one of the things that I said before, payment is very much linked to cultural. And we believe that part of the success of PayPal is the fact that we enable you to pay the way that you feel more secure with. So I was yesterday actually at a dinner that was organized by Swedish Banking Association, and I discovered that actually Swedish people are prepared to pay with credit card for almost anything, although they change behavior when they're traveling. At the opposite, you have potentially Greece or Italy, the country where I'm coming from. Actually, the use of credit card is very low. People don't shop online using credit card. What do they use? Prepaid cards. So what they do, they charge the prepaid cards and they go online. The reason for this is because direct debit is not supported from the way of the infrastructure payment to buy online. And then you have Germany, the largest market in Europe, where people tend to use their bank account. So direct debit is really the way they pay. So you should never force them to switch to another type of payment. What we do at PayPal, we enable you to pay as you want. Credit card, prepaid, So we are a wallet, and just like the wallet that you might have in your pocket or in your bag, you have this digital wallet in which you can put all the payment instruments, and you can start using as you deem fit. So this is the first element that we believe it makes the success of our interaction with merchants. I will just give, I think I'm going over time, just give two main trends of how we help online commerce. From one side, the big merchant, we are providing a range of products actually and enable them to get closer to their users. But also another thing that I believe it brings me very close to our eBay friends is the way we try to enable SMEs. Actually, having PayPal as a way to pay online is much faster and less burdensome than having an SMEs having a card to be accepted for payment. So, and if you look on our website, I just took this as a screenshot, you have a number of tips, really guidance for SMEs. And another thing of which we are particularly proud, we're also offering a lending product. I heard so much about the lack of funds availability. We do this in Europe. We provide SMEs with small amounts of money that they need to start their business online. And it's been a huge success. It's been launched, initially it was launched in the US, now it's been launched in the UK, will soon be launched in other countries. The concern that we have is actually there is national fragmentation, but I suppose there's another story. But there's another demonstration how we can support business. Let me close with this slide. So this slide is not new. It's from 2 years ago, and I enjoy putting this slide in my presentation to the executive because it will make them fall off the chair because they will feel how complex is the regulation on payment. So I'm not going to go on this in details, but I mean, starting from the Payment Service Directive, the e-money directive, the SEPA directive, the SEPA regulation, sorry, and all the anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing. These are all regulations that actually we need to comply with. It's not an easy job, and admittedly, Europe is potentially easier than US in some respects because my colleagues in US, they need to comply with 51 different legislation across Europe, across the US. We have one single market, but still there's a lot of fragmentation and there are lots of regulatory complexity. Let me just stop with a couple of comments. I was surprised that actually you invited me, very honored and really pleased to contribute to the discussion. I hope I'm providing some useful information for you. But I'm not quite sure PayPal should be a platform or not a platform. Anyway, the definition is still under discussion, I understand. My recommendation, look at the content, look at the service that we are providing, and definitely we fall into the definition of payment providers. And as I mentioned, we already are quite regulated. So our recommendation from the service provider perspective, from regulators, is look at what is still hindering digital commerce, look at the barriers, look at the fragmentation, and try to have a light touch and intervene where this could be facilitating actually commerce. And again, I think there is a huge potential for developing European markets, and I think there should be not complex of inferiority with US because there is definitely a long way to go to get one of the best markets in terms of digital development. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Pia. And if we want to have European markets to succeed in the online platforms, we need investments and innovations to online platform economy. And our last speaker will tell us about this perspective. He is Mika Klemettinen from Tekes, which is the Finnish funding agency for innovations. And Mika Klemettinen will provide us an outlook on research, innovations, and funding. Those are very important elements, as we know, when we are looking for solutions to how to make the European Union succeed in the digital economy, which was the title of our whole hearing today. So Mika, please, floor is yours.
Thanks, Henna, and good to be here, and it's a pleasure to close the Finnish-dominated panel here today in the afternoon. As Henna said, I'm representing a Finnish funding agency for innovation, and every year we invest more than 500 million euros for Finnish companies, Finnish universities' R&D and innovations. And another 500 million comes from universities, companies, and other players, which means that we have more than 1 billion euros annually to be used for innovations, which is a lot of money. And from our perspective, digitalization, digital platform economy is one of the key issues that we want to invest in. But then we have to think about that, how to create most for the business and for the companies, how to benefit the society as well, and how to improve the economy in general. Good challenges to begin with. When we are talking about digitalization, we have topics like Internet of Things, big data, 5G, analytics, which are the key drivers when we are now heading towards the fourth industrial revolution. And what is specific here is that revolution spreads across different industries, more or less all the industries. In digitalization, the only constant thing is change, as we all know. One needs to be agile. One has to see the world differently if one wants to succeed. Then the question is, coming back to some of the earlier talks, that are we agile enough in EU? Maybe not always. Are we seeing the world differently enough? Maybe yes, but can we monetize that opportunity? That's a good question. Digital playground is very heterogeneous. There are multiple opportunities, new technologies, business models, but many of them are not standardized. Many of them are not interoperable, or if they are because some global companies, unfortunately, in most cases not coming from Europe, are having proprietary closed solutions, or they are providing de facto solutions where the EU players have nothing to do with. They cannot influence them. So many of those winning solutions are coming outside of Europe. However, many innovations indeed are coming from Europe. But are we good enough and fast enough to turn our skills into business, to monetize the opportunities that we have? One big opportunity that we have is that we can base that on collaboration. We need to take a holistic and open approach in the platform economy, and we need to look very closely on certain enablers for these digital platforms and the digital economy, especially from our perspective, 5G, cybersecurity, data and analytics, artificial intelligence, and the Internet of Things area in general. But as we have discussed today, that's not enough. So we have to also take into account the role of public funding, innovative public procurement, taxation, regulation, deregulation, and so on. If we do that, I think that we have a good opportunity to compete in the future. The technologies that we see most prominent for the Europe to success are based on 5G, IoT, analytics, big data, as I referred to earlier. But what we also need that is not properly invested in is general software skills. Also, security and privacy, as we have heard today, they are important issues to be taken into account, as well as general interoperability issues and research in other areas as well, like materials, electronic sensors, and hardware that is recently been dominated by Asian countries and production. Basically, we have all these elements, both in Finland and in EU in general, but how to take a competitive advantage by utilizing these skills and opportunities. One issue where we can make a difference in this coming platform economy is related to data, both my data and the similar business data in a my data sense. How companies can share data, how they can do business based on data that is being shared. That is why not only the technological platform, but also the platform that is utilizing data is a key issue in the future platform economy. And there are new technologies like blockchain-based technologies that can also make a difference together with the data and enable completely new types of business and business models in the future. So we have a future that is filled with different types of cloud clusters as on the slide are shown. So we have different kind of technologies, 5G, IoT, my data, cybersecurity, robotics, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, and so on. But we also have to take very carefully a look at the new business models in the platform economy, the concrete testbed activities, piloting activities, the internet-based cloud services, business models, ecosystem in general. But also not to forget the man-machine interfaces, the role of the human in the big game, and also the research on those sensors, electronics, and materials that I referred to earlier. Public-private partnerships are also playing an essential role in this new game. One issue here is that the new platforms, they are not only providing solutions and opportunities for business, but also for society and for consumers and end users or humans in general. So how to create platforms in public-private partnership sense, how to utilize public funding, public investments, companies' investments, joint collaborative research, and how to utilize the new technologies, software skills that are needed, and the testing and piloting activities in a new way. On the following slides, I have 4 examples from the Finnish ecosystem or Finnish use case that how we see these areas from the Finnish perspective that should be emphasized and taken forwards. So for instance, in Finland we have a multitude of open ecosystems and testbeds that together with vibrant startup community is creating and enabling new innovations. Another issue about the new ways of working is, for instance, hackathon type of activities where bigger companies come up with challenges and smaller companies come up with potential solutions, and very fast in an agile way they come up with initial solutions that change the thinking of the large companies that can boost new innovations in completely new areas to go much faster forwards than earlier, based on the traditional ways of working, especially in large companies. So the small startup companies can change the way the big companies think so that the big companies can start to utilize the same assets that the small companies normally have in the markets. Still, the small companies can be helping the big companies and are not kind of pushed away from these markets. Testbeds and open collaboration is very important. One example I have here is the Finnish 5G test network Finland, that is the world's most advanced open collaboration test network for 5G. And one example, interesting, unique example, is that the largest network manufacturers, Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei, are collaborating here in Finland on this area as the only place in the world. And there is something that we can gain in this kind of open collaboration where non-traditional or not so obvious partners are collaborating on innovating something together for the benefit of everyone, still enabling the business for each individual company. Then one challenge has been that how to connect the short-term research or short-term business and the longer-term research with each other. One concrete example is that we have been establishing a new maritime cluster in Finland where a large number of global players are innovating technologies and solutions for autonomous shipping and autonomous ships. These use cases, they provide short-term business opportunities for all kinds of players because, for instance, Rolls-Royce is within this cluster planning to have solutions out and autonomous ships out within 5 years. So it means that they want to create all kinds of technological solutions that work in practice. They want to change the legislation and regulations. And this is a kind of a collaboration between the public authorities, companies, research organizations, and this collaboration goes beyond the national borders to cover all kinds of European companies. And these short-term collaborations that are driven by business purposes, they are also giving and feeding new kind of long-term research targets. And this is something that could better connect the short-term business and the long-term research challenges, and also to focus and give objectives for the longer-term research in the EU level. So, in summary, how to make things happen on the EU level, there are 4 issues that I want to conclude my talk with. And based on this, we would need on national and EU level both short-term and long-term investments in digital platform economy, including the business model, research and services, special focus on enabling technologies, testbeds, piloting, and not forgetting the general software skills that are quite often forgotten in the investments and in long-term skills and assets development. Important it also, if we want to be competitive, to focus on open and collaborative platforms, My Data, Open Data, and this business data counterpart to My Data to make business, new ways of working and new business models. What is also important is cross-fertilization over different industries and research disciplines with more concrete business-driven collaboration so that we can concretely connect the short-term business and the longer-term research together to provide more value for the money and objectives and targets to guide the research. Moreover, we need flexible regulation and deregulation, as well as the already mentioned innovative public procurement to boost development and also to create references for markets and for the companies. So, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mika. And now we have time for a short discussion before Andreas Schwab will come to our closing remarks. So is there some questions in the audience? Yeah, Rosa Thun, please.
So maybe a few words to Mr. Lochbihler. I mean, your remarks about harmonization of laws in the European Union is honey to many of our hearts. I hope you will be invited by the Council and you will tell them how important it is to fight against this horrible fragmentation that we have on our constantly uncompleted internal market. But a very concrete question, is this true that Booking.com takes 30% provision and doesn't allow their clients, those who are on the platform, to go below certain prices, to go below certain thresholds, so that the end users, consumers, cannot negotiate directly with hotels, for example? Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. Is there some other questions? Maybe I can add one. Then Mika Clementine already, he had a list in the end that what should be done in the European level if we want to make things happen. But I would like to hear from everybody that if you should, choose one thing what we should do in the European level to boost digital economy in Europe right now, what it should be. Easy question, isn't it? You can also mention several things if it's difficult to choose just one.
Thanks for the question. Our global average commission is 15%, 15%. There are variations a little up and down, but that is the global average across all bookings. On the second part of your question, this is referring to the narrow parity discussion. I try to keep it as non-technical as possible, but since you asked me, I have to step a little bit into the details. Looking at the market share, and that also goes back to comments made before by the Consumer Association, the online travel sites have around about 20-25% of all hotel room bookings. So the vast majority of bookings, you might be surprised, but they actually still happen through traditional channels. That can be direct bookings with the hotel, that can be by phone, by fax. These are classic travel agencies. These are tour operators, very important. So the majority of bookings takes place through other channels. And since mid-2015, the situation is that a hotel on all of these other channels is absolutely free to set the price. What we have as one condition in the agreements with our hotel partners is that on the hotel's own website, we want to be able to offer the same good price. So we don't want to undercut prices. That has never been part of our business model and will never be, but we want to be able to offer the same price, because what happens otherwise is that hotels are happily listed on our site, but since we only get remunerated after we bring business to them, they would undercut our price on their own site, and we would see a free riding effect. This is the reason for that, and this has been looked into by a number of competition authorities, and in 25 out of 28 member states currently, the system of those narrow parity rules is accepted and in place. I'll leave it there. I hope that addresses the questions you raised, but just one last comment. It's easy to spread a story about being dominant and abusing dominance. First of all, there's a very important difference between leading a market and being dominant and abusing that position. And I think we have very competent authorities to deal with these issues, and I would leave it with them. And ultimately, I think being leading in the first place means having a good product, and that should be something to be proud of. That does not go in your direction, don't get me wrong. That just addresses some issues that were made specifically to Booking on the first panel. On your question, Hannah, I would just say, and that goes to the Commission and to the Member States, I'm afraid, once more. Speed up the enforcement procedures, go after Member States where things are not supporting the single market, and don't let domestic agendas, elections, the size of a Member State, don't let that shy the Commission away from enforcing the rules.
Thank you. Yeah, I think mentioned already a couple of examples of what we see as key policy issues to achieve a digital single market. So maintaining a balanced intermediate liability framework and getting rid of online sales restrictions. But maybe on a higher level note, we need a sort of a bigger political commitment to deliver a digital single market. So we welcome the Commission's digital single market strategies. It identified the digital single market as a potential growth and job driver in Europe, identified the right barriers to the digital single market. It even identified the right actions that ought to be undertaken. But sort of 2 years in, the brutal fact is that not a single barrier has been torn down, and a number of new barriers seem to be erected. So just to give you an example is the value-added tax proposal. So the idea was that let's make it easier for small business to trade by creating a one-stop shop for value-added tax in e-commerce. So you deal only with your own tax authority. So that is included in the proposal, good thing. However, that comes along with an obligation to charge the VAT rate of the country of the customer as of a very low threshold, which means that if you're a German SME and a Swedish customer buys something from your web shop or on an online marketplace and you have no further investment into marketing into Sweden, so I have no idea of the Swedish VAT rates, you still need to know it. So you'll need to be aware of all the 28 or however many different VAT rates there will be by the time it comes into force. But when you trade online, and you automatically charge and remit it then through your own tax authority. So there's a lot of this kind of political high-level speak about digital single market is good and it creates growth, but when it trickles down to the specifics of legislative files, we see all kind of like political compromises that actually ruin it for everyone. So, you know, there ought to be more collective responsibility on this.
Thank you. I can just echo all the concern around existing fragmentation and definitely the goodwill of European Union, the Commission and the Parliament, and hopefully also the Council to try to overcome the existing barriers. But I tend to agree that actually as we identify barriers, they tend to multiply in view of political priorities. Again, I want to be very practical, give an example. I mentioned the importance of following consumer choice in terms of the instrument of payments. You might be aware that actually there is a new legislation for the best intention of countering terrorist financing following the terrorist attacks that we all have witnessed. As a result of this, we saw some jurisdiction, I can mention this is France, that has enacted a legislation by saying that actually you can use prepaid cards that are only issued in France, which I found very shocking, because France, as far as I know, is still part of the European Union. So just this example, I think it gives you a sense how these barriers are multiplying despite the best intention of trying to be a digital single market. And perhaps two other things adding to my shopping list, perhaps to regulate, having in consideration the goal, the objective, rather than being prescriptive. I think that leaves freedom of diversifying the approach, and it will also stimulate a creative approach to comply, which I think it will be welcome in the context of digital market. And I think we need more effort in educating around the potential benefit and also the challenges of the digital economy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. I think that one issue about digital platforms, and I'm not only talking about like payment-related online platforms, but general technology platforms that serves the whole industry. Roughly, one could say that's like 2/3 of those platforms and technologies, they are general and they are business vertical agnostic. And only 1/3 nowadays is tailored for specific business vertical needs, which means that there is some work to be done in changing the mindset of many people and many sectors, that digitalization and digital platforms is not one vertical among the others. It's a horizontal dimension. It sounds very simple, but there is still a lot of thinking that digitalization, ICT is something separate, something that is not concerning us or should be treated separately. And it's not an ICT issue. It's basically everybody's issue, which means that we need also joint EU level and national investments where we forget, as we heard earlier, we forget about the national agendas that might be influenced by politics and be changed from year to year, or that we are too slow in harmonizing the issues on an EU level. So we need to put investments on EU level and national level fast enough, big enough, in order to be competitive against the non-European de facto solutions.
Yes, thank you. Before we are going to Anders Schwab's closing remarks, I would like to thank all our panelists and also the audience. Like I said, we are finalizing our draft report with my co-rapporteur Philippe Juvin, and deadline for the draft report of IMCO and ITRE committee is end of February. So it means that after that it will go to translation, and during the March and April we will discuss about the topic more in these two committees, and then we will have the voting in May. So all the comments and presentations, they were very helpful and fruitful for this, this work, what we are doing with Mr. Juvin. But now I would like to give the floor for our IMCO coordinator, Anders Schwab, who will give the closing remarks for us. And are you doing it? That's it, maybe. Or do you want to come here?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hannah. And I think I should start with saying that you and Philippe, you did a great job in arranging for this hearing to happen. I think we had plenty of different points of views. But I think, as you mentioned already beforehand, the message is very clear. You said, yes, we can. Maybe that's a little bit too optimistic, but yes, we can in some years. And we have to do the job that is ahead of us since quite a while. We have to make sure that companies in Europe can scale up. That will demand, as the representative of eBay has just said, adaptations in European law, maybe harmonization in a certain number of areas that so far are far away from European law. And I think for eBay, the VAT system is a specific problem. If small sellers want to sell cross-border, you very quickly fall into a trap with national VAT systems, and that can be very burdensome. And very often small companies, as has mentioned by Mr. Lochbihler, don't have the time nor the money to spend their activities just to respect the law. They want to respect the law, but if it's too burdensome, they prefer to do it otherwise. That's not in the interest of the citizens, and that's not in the interest of the taxpayers. So member states should reflect what they can do better to improve the system if we don't want to have further regulation. And that leads me to my second point. I think we have several times this afternoon in the first panel been speaking about enforcement, about the question as to whether we need more European law. I think, Hannah, we are probably both united to say that more law is not the solution, but the application and the enforcement of existing law, I think in a certain number of areas, seems to us to be too slow. And therefore, I think we have to maybe invite the Commission and others to take the example of one of the companies that has offered to make that digital workshops to show how the digital world is organized. And if needed, we have to step up our efforts to apply and to enforce European law. Maybe that's the best solution for all of us, leaving apart the question how, in fact, platforms have to be defined in detail. Maybe we then do that at a later stage. Thank you so much for organizing that, and thank you so much to all of you for being with us.